Hello, everybody. Figured I'd let some people show up. This is a decent number actually for the morning, though, so go ahead and turn this off. Welcome to this edition of V Radio, everybody. I don't usually go this early, but later today I have to drive my son to the wrestling state championships, so wanted to give you guys a stream to discuss this issue. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. If you haven't, please share the stream. Please smash the like button. I'm slowly still gaining subscribers, but it's pretty clear that my stream is being choked off as much as it can get away with it. So make sure that you also check out my website, v-radio.us, where you can find me on all of my different platforms. So anyway, I'm currently banned from Facebook, ironically not for anything important. I actually just told a girl that I've been coaching since she was a little girl in wrestling to whoop dat ass. Like, I didn't even spell anything negative. I said that on Facebook, and Facebook identified that as a violation of, like, they thought I was bullying her or something. She knew that wasn't what was going on, and neither did anybody else. Literally, the algorithm just grabbed it itself. So I wish I could say that I was banned from Facebook for some kind of fighting against the man, but it was actually just something really stupid. I can still get private messages there, and I have other ways to access the Fans of E-Radio group and things like that. So, but anyway, today we're going to talk about the Jussie Smollett verdict, but we're also going to discuss some other hoaxes, not all of which are race hoaxes. And we're going to discuss specifically, what is the motive? Why do people do this? What is the reason? What is why would anybody want to do this to themselves? And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So first, I'm going to try to share with you guys, we're going to look at just a little clip that has some of the juicier parts of Juicy, so to speak, discussing, not discussing, but reacting to finally being, charged and sentenced, and it was a little nuts. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at that now. Go ahead and pull that up here. Thanks again for tuning in, everybody, and let's watch this together. Now, that to give you guys a little background, before this happens, the judge goes on a long diatribe, really just nailing down all the different things that Jussie Smollett did wrong, and going over the details of the case, about how he tied the noose around his own neck, about how he hired people, about how he created this huge problem because he's supposed to be doing this as an activist, and doing something like this literally creates more problems for people who actually are legitimate, victims of hate crimes. But that's one of the things we're going to go into again, is like, what is the motive for something like this? Why do people do this? And it's because of the fact that, ironically, there's an exalted status for you if you're a victim of something like this. Doing something like this makes you relevant in their social circles. It makes you special. And that goes with not just like celebrities like Jussie Smollett, who was trying to get more attention for his acting career, but also for just like common activists. And we're going to get into some of those stories as we go on. And again, not all of them are race. So let's go ahead and listen to this clip first. This stuff is comedy gold. Seriously. Here we go.
The damage you've done to yourself is way beyond anything else that can happen to you from me or any other judge that would be sentencing you in this criminal case. You are now a permanently convicted felon. Your family, who loves you and supports you, I only want to use the word forgive because forgiveness isn't even necessary. They're with you so much. They're so tight-knit, but you have to live with the fact that you really put them through a ringer. You've embarrassed your valuable friends in high places, elected public officials, people in the media. You've embarrassed them. You have to live with that. I don't know if those relationships can be repaired. You've become toxic in your own workplace. Your career future is uncertain at very best. It was really on a rocket ship to success, and now you've turned yourself into riches to rags, and it's so unfortunate. Your very name has become an adverb for lying. And I cannot imagine what could be worse than that. I'm trying to consider who you are as a person, how you got here, how somehow you strayed away from your family values. You let that dark, narcissistic, selfish, and arrogant side come out, and you persisted with it for years on this case. I'm fashioning the following sentence, and here's your sentence. I'm sentencing you to 30 months felony probation, and the probation is going to be to this court. You're going to be allowed to travel wherever you want. You do not have to live in the state of Illinois. You can report by phone. I know that if you're going to try to make a living and do some of the things you do, you may have to go to other places, New York and Los Angeles. You can do those things. You will pay restitution to the city of Chicago in the amount of $120,106. You are fined $25,000, which is the maximum fine. And you will spend the first 150 days of your sentence in the Cook County Jail. And that will start today, right here, right now.
No, I would just like to say to Your Honor that I am not suicidal. That's what I would like to say.
Okay.
I am not suicidal.
Okay.
I am not suicidal. I am innocent, and I am not suicidal. If I did this, then it means that I stuck my fist in the fears of Black Americans in this country for over 400 years and the fears of the LGBTQ community. Your Honor, I respect you and I respect the jury, but I did not do this, and I am not suicidal. And if anything happens to me when I go in there, I did not do it to myself, and you must all know that. I respect you, Your Honor. I respect your decision. Jail time. I am not suicidal.
Okay. Mr. Uche, let me inquire, are there any post-sentencing motions you care to present? Court is adjourned.
I am not suicidal. I am not suicidal, and I am innocent. I could have said that I was guilty a long time ago.
So a little more background on what took place there. They like desperately tried to keep him out of jail. Like they went on, like for one thing, they tried to ask for a new trial, and I just got to sit there. I was watching Neo Unrealist stream actually, and I get to just sit there and suffer through them trying basically to retry the case right there in front of the judge, begging for a new trial. Like they thought with a different trial somehow they'd get a different result. The evidence was just overwhelming against him. And leading right up to that, they tried to stay execution. They tried to, do everything they could to get anything to prevent anything from happening to him. And the judge just said, I understand, but nope, denied. They did everything they could. And it's just insane to me how everybody's reacting. I watched the Black Lives Matter Twitter, waiting to see if they were going to react in any way, and they were strangely quiet. Because they've been openly supporting him through this entire thing. So I expected them to have more of a point there, but they didn't. And I think it's because maybe they've kind of decided they need to distance themselves from it as well. So next we're going to watch a clip of his family talking to kind of give you an indication of just how many people they've either bought into this, to help him lie about it, or their motive would be, just that they're legitimately, basically, how would I put it? They're just legitimately brainwashed by it. Like they legitimately believe it. I don't know. I guess I'll let you judge for yourselves. But this was literally right afterwards, and kind of go to the part where his family's actually talking, so we don't need to listen to these pundits. But here we go.
And Erica, before we dive into that, I do want to throw over to Jussie Smollett's older brother, Jojo, who's speaking right now. So let's go over to that right now.
He spoke about his arrogance. He doesn't know the struggles my brother is encountering. He doesn't know anything that he's dealing with. He doesn't know anything that he's dealing with. He's spent all that time shaming him. In 2022, we don't shame people like this, all right? He basically called him a mental case, all right? If you look at that testimony, he basically reiterated and regurgitated all the prosecutor said. There was no.
In 2022, we don't shame people like this? Is he living in the same year that I am? Because they try to shame people for anything. Just never mind.
Independence. This is a duly elected judge in Cook County. He's supposed to be elected by the people, not just a stooge and a rubber stamp for the prosecutors. And I'm very disappointed, very disappointed.
Your name again, sir?
My name is Jojo Smollett. I'm his oldest brother.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have something I want to say quickly.
Your name, ma'am?
My name is Jussie Smollett. I'm his older sister. First of all, I want to say my brother is innocent. My brother Jussie is innocent. This should not be a controversial statement because it is the absolute truth. What should be controversial is the entire miscarriage of justice this whole ordeal has been. I pray peace over my brother. I pray the peace of God over my brother and all victims of oppression and hate. I pray that we can do better as a world. May the God of peace be with you. Shalom.
Your name, sir?
My name is Jussie Smollett. I'm Jussie's youngest brother. My brother does not deserve this. I watched my brother go from being a complete victim, which he still is. He was attacked, and he is now going to jail for being attacked. I saw my brother get locked up within 2 weeks for being attacked. Do you know how crazy that is? They want to say in that court and say that he's the reason why folks aren't going to report hate crimes. They're the reason why folks aren't going to report hate crimes.
Because none of you believed it.
None of y'all believed it. We have letters from the NAACP, President Derek Johnson himself. We have letters from Rainbow Push Coalition. We have letters from the Innocence Project, all saying that he should not be in jail. And they put him in jail. That judge chastised him. He chastised my brother. He does not deserve this. He was attacked. Do people never once think, even the folks who are naysayers, do you ever once think, what happens if he's telling the
What if
truth?
he's telling the truth?
Do y'all ever think about how poorly you feel in that situation? He's in jail for 5 months. That is unacceptable. For being attacked. It is not his fault that folks are not going to believe survivors anymore.
Do we ever think about what happens if he, wasn't telling the truth? That's what due process is all about. And this comes back to, I don't know if you guys watched it, but it's a video I did about guilt or innocence. It depends on your skin color, according to Black Lives Matter. That's exactly what's going on here. They basically feel that narcissistically, they should not be subject to any form of punishment, which is why they're still trying to bail out Darrell Brooks, the Waukesha Parade massacre killer. They're still trying to raise $5 million to get that guy out. Anyway.
He is a survivor and he has been completely mistreated, and this has to stop.
Please do your investigative journalism work.
I'm Jussie Smollett's grandmother.
A remarkable
and it was a
moment
complete
there, and
frame-up.
we have seen. Let's listen to Grandma.
From being abducted into the prison system, you know it, and you guys got to do more investigative reporting, more investigation. Okay, thanks.
Can you say, Molly?
We have to do more investigation. That's all we fucking talked about. This guy got 3 years of everybody's attention, which is, in the end of the day, one of the motives for doing something like this. Basically, until you find, my grandson innocent, you haven't done enough work.
His comments after the sentencing, the reiteration and the repeating that he's not suicidal, are you worried about what's going to happen to him in prison? Why do you think he said that?
He just wanted to reassure us. He wanted to reassure us.
So that was for you.
He's innocent. Okay, like so many in prison that shouldn't be there. Get the white collar guys, okay, who are really making money, who are really corrupt. We've got to do something about saving our democracy here so that we don't get another Putin. Okay, I love you guys. Okay, I'm a film person.
My name is Nate Phillips, and I would just like to say, until the person who recently occupied the White House, the judge said that Mr. Smollett was accused of lying. Well, guess what? The man that occupied the White House was accused of telling thousands of lies. And as long as he remains free, Jussie should remain free.
Okay, this is a gentleman not connected necessarily.
That's when the media figures out that they gave a platform to some rando who's like, well, as long as Donald Trump isn't in jail, Jussie Smollett shouldn't be in jail. you know, whataboutism is only a problem if you're whatabouting something that they don't like. But anyway, let's interact here a little bit with the chat. I had to give somebody a timeout, guys. Don't spam freaking gorillas in the chat. No racism, folks. I do plenty of talk on here about debunking false racism. Don't, like, you know, make it look real. So anyway. Anyway, so Jussie Smollett got enormous amounts of attention for this, and, you know, there was a lot going on at the time. People were saying things along the lines of, you know, that he should be paid more money as an actor, and, you know, he got on all these talk shows, and, you know, he got like a special celebrity status. And I think that, you know, that's one of the major motives, obviously. But in addition to that, you know, it's the self-important motive of just wanting people to pay attention to you. So I looked over, so like, as I've been like saving these to do a video about this for a little while, but just different cases that were similar to this. So on a college campus, it was actually a few years ago, I think. This girl was not getting enough attention for her Black Lives Matter chapter because, to be honest, there just really wasn't a whole lot of racism, you know, on the campus in question. So she literally created a fake Twitter account to threaten herself in the middle of one of her events to try to get more attention for, you know, what she was doing, you know. And this video here, we're going to look at it together, goes over this.
Black student group at a North Jersey college admits to tweeting anonymous threats against Black students. Kayla McKelvey entered a guilty plea yesterday to creating a false public alarm. Prosecutors say the former Kane University student tweeted those threats because she wanted more people to attend a rally on racial issues last fall. She's facing 90 days in jail and could be ordered to pay the school $80,000 to cover the cost of police response and increased security after those threats.
I talked to several professors on this campus today who...
Now, this is important because this takes you back to how it was originally reported and the way everybody reacted when this hoax went down.
Told me that they canceled their classes because there were so few students planning on coming, and those who did have classes say there were maybe 3 or 4 students in classes that normally have 25 or 30. Administrators here at Kane University say they don't have a solid count, but it was clear that hundreds, if not thousands, of students steered clear of this campus today in the wake of those threats.
Most of my friends are in their rooms. They haven't left since the tweets went out.
The threat started on Tuesday night as Black students gathered underneath the campus's clock tower for a peaceful rally to bring awareness to what they say is racism on college campuses.
Because we come from urban school systems and we don't have the same education level.
They'd come to support students at the University of Missouri and soon found themselves facing the same type of vitriolic hate. A Twitter account emerged, Kane University Against Blacks, tweeting messages threatening to shoot Black students on site.
Making statements like this shows that we still have a lot of work to do.
Kane's president Dawood Fahari made an impromptu address to a few dozen students who had gathered back at the clock tower at lunchtime.
I'm so happy that he's with us. He understands where we're coming from.
It was Fahari who made the decision to keep school open despite the threats after university police deemed they were not credible. And though the Twitter account was shut down this morning, the person responsible is still not in custody.
All morning I've been getting calls.
Still not in custody because she's literally sitting there among the activists.
Calls and text messages from students. I'm not coming today, you know, and we shouldn't have to live like that in fear.
Some of the classes got canceled, but I still dare to show up and support my people here. I mean, white, black, we're all the same. We have the same color, same blood.
In the wake of this incident, there are now calls for the university president to step down.
But the time has come, as we see on yesterday, and especially that it took him 6 hours after the initial threat to come and make the students feel safe, says a lot about where his mind is at this particular moment.
In a statement issued late this afternoon...
So they want to fire the president of the university over this, and it turns out the whole thing was a hoax.
response to those comments, the university says they are offended that this group of ministers would attack Dr. Fahari in that way. They say he is a member of the Tri-City NAACP and that he is dedicated to diversity and the advancement of both students and faculty on the campus of Kane University. That's where we are tonight. I'm Pat Battle, News 4 New York.
So her motive was that, you know, the person who did this, let me just go ahead and pull up another article on that. But her motive was that she wasn't getting enough attention for her Black Lives Matter chapter, because on that particular campus, there just really wasn't a lot of racism. You know, so what's the response to that? Well, the response to that, you know, is that she needed to be the focus of attention. You know, she wanted it. She wanted that celebrity status of being the, you know, the oppressed person, you know, and it creates just kind of a social stratification. And when you're hanging out in activist groups, people who've been, you know, like survivors of something like that, you know, they get treated. It's basically like being, you know, it makes you popular, I guess would be the word to put it. You know, it makes you influential, you know, and people are chasing stuff like that. You know, let me go ahead and pull up another article about that just to kind of go over it. But the point is that she was motivated by the fact that she wasn't getting enough attention for her Black Lives Matter chapter, and she wanted, you know, craved essentially that attention. She actually ended up doing, I believe it was like 3 months in jail for this, was what I recall. You know, and I'll give you guys links to this if you want to read more about it, but it was a while ago. You know, and she just said she wasn't getting enough attention for her chapter, but it's really, is she not getting enough attention for herself? That's really the motive at the end of the day. That's what this is about. You know, she ended up pleading guilty to sending the anonymous racial threats on Twitter. And the funny thing is when people do stuff like this, like that was like, you know, somebody said that what Jussie Smollett did, if he had done it, was low key noble. Like as in we need to, it's noble for you to lie to everybody and you know, make something like this up, you know, or as the Lotus Eaters, meaning Sargon of Akkad, would say, you know, the supply for racism is not meeting the demand. You know, and so she got, you know, a president of a university, like, you know, they wanted his job, and all this money was spent, and all of this, you know, hoopla went on, and everybody, you know, it's essentially terrorism because she made everybody afraid, you know, for a political purpose. And again, you know, like there's more where these came from. You can take a look here at the chat, interact with you guys a little bit before we move on to the next case. Thanks again for tuning in to V Radio. Oh boy. I wish we could pay for a soul to go to all these places and put all these turds in their place. You know, I know what you're saying, and a lot of people told me have looked at that. The problem is that there's an addiction going on here to the victim complex. There's an addiction going on here to being part of like something like this, and they don't want to listen, you know. And as the bear in the woods says, you couldn't get further from the actual truth. These two fat white MAGA chuds attacked me in the street. Turns out they were giant actual African bodybuilders. Right. You know, but there are people still defending him, including Black Lives Matter, because police lie. That's what they came out and said, you know. And Friends College in West Virginia had a black on Asian attack. Crickets from the university. Now, I did a whole video about black versus Asian racism. If you haven't checked it out, Alpha Fox Adam, you could find it in my playlist under racism, where I go over the real data about what really takes place. There's very real racism between blacks and Asians, and it's because they occupy the same spaces. And that's really what causes racism. So, you know, Jussie Smollett, famous French actor. As long as it fits their course. Denmark is listening. I don't know why Denmark is listening. Oh, unless you're from Denmark. That's pretty awesome. Live Freedom says, good morning, B Radio. Hello there, Live Freedom. Oh, that was me. Was I in the woods? No, that was me. Bear in the woods. Yeah, actually, Aspork, I have several videos of Asian hate crimes in my video, and I also have like a funny panel that was put together with Jada Pinkett Smith. That's like but and also just like Will Smith's wife, and she brings on people, and then one of them just sits there and discusses black racism against Asians just openly, literally revealing exactly why they think what they do and what they do, and why they do it. And then they bring on Dyson, and of course he has to bring the whole thing back around to what the real problem is white supremacy. So when black people attack Asian people, it's because of white supremacy. Yeah, I wish I was making that up. That was probably one of my favorite videos I did, and I brought all the receipts because there's actual uh, scholarly articles addressing the issue and looking into statistics. So, Lucifer the Doberman, what's going on? How you doing, Zapucci? It's good to see you guys. So let me go ahead and pull up the next example. So another reason why people engage in these hate crime hoaxes is to basically try to get themselves out of being in trouble. And they do this by just inventing hate crimes that are not real. This story also was a big deal, and these girls got all kinds of attention. They did press conferences and exposed that they were standing up against racism. And what really happened here is that they literally started a fight, like started an attack, a brawl on a bus, and then got off the bus and called 911 and claimed that they were attacked by a racist gang on the bus. Let's have a look.
Well, they claim they were attacked because they're black, but now 3 SUNY Albany students are facing criminal charges.
Now, 2 of the students are from the island, and there is security camera video of the incident. Antoinette Biordi has the story you saw first on 12.
After a 3-week investigation, SUNY Albany police released this video that they say shows 3 students attacking a 19-year-old girl on a city bus. 2 of those girls are 20-year-old Aisha Burwell and 20-year-old Ariella Gudio, both from Huntington.
Now, did you see how like the people that they're hitting are literally trying to peacefully break up that fight?
Station. No one answered the door at their homes, but neighbors near Burwell's home say they're surprised that she was part of this alleged attack.
They're such nice people, our neighbors next door, you know.
She's a good girl, honor student.
So you're really surprised about this?
Oh, yeah, the whole thing. I didn't think that would happen up in Albany.
But police say when it first happened, the 3 girls spoke out on campus on February 2nd, saying they were the ones who were physically.
Now, you see all these people here that showed up to give their support for these 2, girls who were racistly attacked on the bus. This is why this turns into a hoax, because they're thinking to themselves, "Oh, look, awesome! What do I get out of this? I get to be popular. I get to be the focus of attention."
Physically and verbally attacked by 12 white men and women on that bus.
12 white men and women attacked them on that bus.
Burwell claimed it was racially motivated.
We stand here with strength because we value our worth as Black women and as human beings in general.
But according to police, all of it was a lie. After carefully looking at surveillance video, cell phone video, and interviewing witnesses, police have now charged the 3 with assault and falsely reporting an incident. Cops say the girls
They are literally the only people in this video throwing any punches.
not only instigated the fight, but continued assaulting the victim despite efforts by passengers to stop them. The president of SUNY Albany came out in support of the girls at first.
There is no place on our campus for intolerance.
Today, he only released a statement saying this matter is now in the hands of the criminal justice system. I look forward to the resolution of this case. SUNY Albany student Jeffrey Rosenheck, who is from Bethpage, says the president was too quick to side with the girls.
I feel that President Jones should send out an apology, one to the 10 to 12 students who were allegedly convicted of committing this crime, and the rest of the University at Albany community.
Now, the 3 girls were charged with assault and falsifying an incident. They'll be facing a judge in Albany on Monday.
So they were all about the attention they were getting until it turns out that there was a CCTV camera focused on them that showed that they were walking up and ganging up and attacking one girl, and that everybody on the bus basically just tried to stop them. And you see those guys were literally taking punches from those girls and not hitting them back. Like that, they were literally just trying to break up the fight. And so again, what kind of mentality do you need to be in to be able to foster a lie like that and continue going on with it? Just, and that's the same kind of crap we're dealing with Jussie Smollett, So there was another example, and I don't have video for this one, but I'll show you guys the article where a girl, unfortunately, created a race hoax and was not aware that she was being filmed at the time. And I'm gonna go ahead and just pull it up here. I want to thank you guys again for tuning in. Once again, check me out at v-radio.us, where you can check me out on all of my various mediums. Okay, so Viterbro student who reported racist incidents accused of starting a fire in the residential hall. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a bit so you guys can read this with me. The La Crosse Tribune. A Viterbro University student who said she was a victim of 2 recent racist incidents on campus has been accused of starting a fire in a residence hall April 18th and framing it as a hate crime. Victoria Unaka was released on a signature bond Monday after La Crosse police arrested her for arson and negligent handling of burning materials. This is a complex situation that involves a series of concerning incidents, said Viterbro University President Galena Temple. We continue to investigate the incidents earlier in the semester and any potential link between them and this fire. The La Crosse Fire Department was dispatched shortly after before 2:30 a.m. to Marion Hall, where security personnel reported the fire on the second floor lounge of the residence hall. The fire was put out with a fire extinguisher, but the department reported a fair amount of smoke damage and that the building needed to be ventilated. There was minor damage to a wall and a small area of carpet. The fire didn't activate the building's sprinkler system. A La Crosse Police Department report says Unaka was identified on surveillance video that had been recently installed after reports of racist and threatening graffiti. Interesting. So in other words, because of the racist incidents that had taken place previously, they installed a camera, didn't tell anybody, so then she got caught creating a race hoax. The video reportedly shows Unaka left her room around 2:09 a.m. and could be seen glancing around and checking the area for other people. During the next 5 minutes, she entered a lounge area and a bathroom before returning to her room. The report says that after the camera picked up images of smoke around 2:14 a.m., Unaka frantically knocked on multiple residents' doors and pulled a fire alarm. When police arrived at the scene, several students were discussing concerns that the fire was another hate crime incident. A residential advisor told police that Unaka texted a friend that she was potentially a victim of another hate crime because the fire was started next to her dorm room. Unaka reportedly told police that she had been out with friends that night and arrived back at the residence hall around midnight. She said she prepared food, went into the lounge area to wash her hands, and didn't go anywhere else in the building before going to her room. The report says Unaka told police she didn't notice anything suspicious before the alarm sounded, and that she and a friend then knocked on residents' doors to alert them of the fire before leaving the building. Police questioned Unaka about the inconsistency between her version of events and the video footage. She reportedly changed her story and told police she wanted to intentionally start a fire in the lounge by turning on a stove and leaving it on. The report says Unaka told police she had a change of heart and no longer wanted to start the fire. She said she had returned to the lounge from the bathroom. She found old food remnants on the stove and she attempted to use paper towels to clean up a smoking mess. She said the towels caught on fire and that she took them in an attempt to extinguish the flames before depositing the burned tissues in the garbage can. Unaka reportedly told police that she was frustrated that nobody was listening to me anymore. So, this is really important, guys. No one was listening to me anymore. She did this because of the fact that she wasn't popular anymore. She wasn't getting attention anymore because she wasn't the victim of any hate crimes anymore. So she literally at this point was motivated to, create a hate crime hoax for the purpose of bringing more attention and credibility to herself as a racial activist. And that's really what this is about for a lot of these people. They want the attention. They crave the attention. There are mental illnesses that go along with this. I remember reading actually watching a disturbing video about parents who get this kind of a strange condition where they'll literally hurt their children on purpose, and then because they crave the attention that they get for being parents who have a sick child, but regardless, she literally said, no one was listening to me anymore. That meant that she was trying to talk to people about race issues, and she wasn't suddenly the focal point of attention. And she craved that attention, so she was literally creating a hate crime to, along those lines for that purpose. And now they're saying, well, we're still, investigating the others, and I think they should, because the likelihood at this point is I have a funny feeling that this girl probably did all the other stuff too. So. I said earlier that, first of all, let me go and interact with the chat, get you guys' reactions, then we'll go from there. But, same with the gender pronouns. They want to be more oppressed than the next person. They want attention. They are the new victim. Cuddle me, they scream. And this is actually kind of interesting, because when you go back to the Occupy progressive stack, people were in a situation where, in order to be the more important speakers, they had to try to layer as many oppressed labels on themselves as possible. And that the more that they had, the more everybody had to listen to them. The more their opinion was therefore more valid. The more that everybody wanted to hear what they had to say. And that really is kind of the core of it. It really is why this social justice stuff, goes down that direction. And so moving on, there was another hoax, and this is ironically not racial related. It's actually more related to my geek history. But some time ago, there was a big Me Too movement specifically addressing sexual harassment instances in the cosplay community at anime conventions. And they have a justified point to say that cosplay isn't consent, and I agree with that. But I do have to say something my mother pointed out to me once, that she found it interesting sometimes when people wear extremely risque clothing and then are upset that they're getting attention. It always seems like the only person they want paying attention to them is the people that they find attractive. And if anybody else looks at them, then there's a problem. But regardless, you still shouldn't be putting your hands on anybody without consent. But if somebody looks at you and you're dressed like that, then you're a creeper somehow. You're supposed to, by osmosis, know whether or not the person is interested in you, I guess. But in any case, so some time ago in the cosplay convention circuit, there was this instance where a girl falsely, 13 years later, and I had to do the Wayback Machine because she deleted this because she ended up in a lot of trouble for it, well, at least social trouble, and then eventually financial trouble because she got successfully sued. The girl's name was Lauren Fates. Out here, she's saying, I want to publicly thank Chicago's premier comic convention because basically she made false allegations against this anime photographer. And as a consequence of that, these conventions all banned this guy. He wasn't allowed to come, but Zero Tolerance naming my cosplay harasser. She wanted to be one of the special people who was victimized, at one of these conventions. And what does that do? Well, it gets you invited to be on panels and to be more important and to be more, your view of things is therefore more important. Remember what these people always say is that your victimization status is what determines your place in the social hierarchy. So you guys can, and I'll give you guys the links if you're interested in looking into this story, but she went on to give a really false version of events of what took place between her and this photographer. And it was 13 years prior. And she comes out with this blog, gets herself all kinds of attention, gets this guy, he's a professional photographer, banned from multiple conventions. And again, what's the point of this? Why, why did she lie about it? Well, it made her special. It made her important. It made her, an activist against the man, and they had to the people who finally debunked this story. Well, it actually went down in a couple of ways. The first of which is that people were kind of becoming a little skeptical of it because her story changed a little bit. But in addition to that, she falsely accused this guy of following her to her hotel room, of, doing all kinds of different creepy things, and left out a few key details, like that it was his hotel room, that he didn't follow her. And he ended up one of his friends looked at him and said, wait a second, didn't you have all of this on one of your old cameras? And so This is months after this was broken. He went, oh my God, you're right. And he goes digging through his closet, and he comes across this camera that had video footage that proved that most of the details of what she said were completely inaccurate. So there were a couple of different articles that I'll just kind of glance over with you guys about this. But people who came out in support for her, even after it was obvious she was lying, in some of the conventions, for example, refused to unban the guy. They're like, we stand with her, because again, her position as the victim in this situation was apparently more important than the actual accuracy of any of the actual claims. So this is one of the blogs that, came out obviously in support of her. And then they looked kind of stupid and had egg on their face when the video came out, proving that, there were all kinds of details here, that just weren't accurate. So again, we talk about what are the motives here? Why do people do stuff like this? And there was a lot of censorship that went on back and forth between people about this, but she claimed that, let me see here, if actually I can bring this up, because they bring up, well, you can't, she still feels she had trauma, and, you can't trivialize someone's trauma. And so this person points out, why doesn't Ron get to have trauma? I would be devastated if someone I thought of as a friend suddenly started telling such lies about me. And yes, they are lies. In the video, Lauren is quite rude and not remotely scared of Ron. She even taunts him about, you broke your door. But basically, these are the lies that she made. Inescapable falsehoods. 1, we were followed. She followed him. She needed him to open the door for her to get into his room. 2, amidst girls screaming of no and what is wrong with you and go away. But only she had said this and gave him the finger. And it was before anyone started undressing, because basically the accusation was that he like came into the room and tried to get video of them of them undressing. The photographer rushed in with a camera, attempting to get nude photos and or video of underage cosplayers, but Ron did not have the camera at that point. So these are all just like basic things that were proven totally wrong, and this girl still hasn't really, suffered any kind of social ramifications for this. There are some people that went ahead and supported her, but in the court of law, what finally came about was that, she did, and this is actually kind of rare, guys. This is one of the things that, you have to remember. There are so many people who get falsely accused of stuff like this who are not lucky enough that they happen to have a video of the whole thing. That's really the only thing that saved this guy, and even then it didn't fully save him, because people who, and like there's one of the other blogs I decided not to include was from one of this girl's friends saying, well, no, he obviously still did this wrong and that wrong. Was she a minor? She was a minor, but so is he. She kept bringing up that she was a minor over and over again in all of this, but left out the fact that he was only 1 year older than her. That was an example of how they just kept misrepresenting the story over and over again, because she wanted to be the exalted person getting attention for being victimized at a convention by some creeper. And the guy hadn't done anything wrong. He was just another kid acting like a kid. And there were no like naked pictures of anybody. That was all nonsense. But again, you guys can look this up. I'll share it with you. But one of the things, though, is that the interesting thing is at the end of the day, when all of the evidence was finally reviewed, in a rare instance, this guy happened to be, in a situation that he happened to have, video that proved that she was lying. But even after the video was brought up, like I said, many of these conventions still didn't change their perspective on the situation, and however, in a court of law, it didn't work out for her. She tried to defend herself literally by saying that she should be allowed to say these things about him because it was her opinion. And she continues to defend herself as, well, that's how I remember it, even though the video shows that that's not what happened. And this kind of goes back to, he was awarded like $110,000, by the way, because of her defamation, because she completely harmed his reputation and, also harmed his ability to continue to make money as a photographer. But she continues to defend herself with the idea, well, I still felt traumatized and I still feel traumatized, and you can't, trivialize that, and it doesn't matter what the evidence shows. I'm still the victim here, is essentially how they put it. So, and she tried to defend herself, just with the different ways. It's very hard to get a defamation lawsuit to go through. And he succeeded. So hats off to the dude. But, you know, she continued to try to fight it under the idea that she should still be allowed to give her opinion of events. Even if she does it publicly, you know, no matter how much damage she did, it was just ridiculous. So again, the reason why I feel that this has some commonalities here, you know, is just that what is, again, the motive? These people want to feel special. These people want to be, you know, the exalted ones who have been, you know, in some way victimized. And why is that? What has the effect of that? Well, there's multiple things here. One of which is that some of these people are desperate for validation of their narrative. So that's why, for example, they cling to January 6th, because January 6th is supposed to be their perfect evidence of a massive white supremacist conspiracy, you know, that's going on to try to overthrow the country and make fascism, you know. And as I covered on my Everything's Gonna Be All White first episode, that, you know, they're whitewashing, you know, January 6th, and they desperately need to, because they don't really have any evidence that there's this enormous number of white supremacists trying to create fascism in this country. And that's why they have to talk about it endlessly, you know, because of the fact that it's the only like kernel of possibility that they could bring up, you know, and it's just nonsense. So anyway, now moving on to another topic, guys, and then I'm going to play a couple of the videos that I've made recently, because I know some of you guys only watch stuff if I put it on streams. But these are some kind of mild updates on some of the things I've talked about recently. So not long ago, as in we've discussed the issue of bail reform being a big thing for the left. And there's a nonprofit called the Bail Project that is also trying to, I don't know if it's the Bail Project. No, BLM in Milwaukee, I think, is trying to, you know, get Daryl Brooks out of jail still. But they bailed this guy out. They provided his $5,000 bail, black gentleman, in a domestic violence case. And then he got out. 2 hours later, he murdered his wife. You know, he's the victim in the situation. The evil criminal justice system was coming down on him. And within like 2 hours, I guess, of him getting out of jail, because this nonprofit bailed him out, he murdered his wife. So these guys, there's this attitude among the left right now, the extreme left, I got to make the distinction, that criminals are always the victims in these situations. When you want to bail out Daryl Brooks, the guy who intentionally drove his car and killed 6 people, including a little boy and old people, and then injured 40 others, and then just kept doing it, you know, when that person is still the victim to you, when Jussie Smollett is still the victim, no matter what, you know, evidence is provided against them, you know, when, you know, and as I did in the video about guilt or innocence, I pointed out that Dante Wright, the guy that was accidentally shot by a police officer, was a total piece of shit. You know, they need these people to be the victims somehow in their narrative. And it just doesn't, I can't wrap my head around it. And that it's weird because, again, remember what I said earlier, that there's kind of this, what was I going to say? Hierarchy. You know, I called it what do I call it? The woke rape culture, that for some reason racial issues are just a little more important than women issues. You know, they have a hierarchy. So if for some reason that guy is black, he needs to be bailed out of jail, never mind the fact that he was there for a domestic violence charge. And then then they facilitate and enable him to murder his wife. That's what the result of all that was. You know, it's unbelievable. So another little detail here I wanted to bring up, recent development in the Ma'Khia Bryant case, is that they actually had to put together a grand jury, if you can believe it, to go over this case to see if they would charge the cop. You know, this case is another one that was just an excellent example of how absolutely insane the narrative here is, because they defended this girl like her right to get involved in knife fights. I remember one of the tweets was like, you know, kids have been getting into knife fights for centuries, and, you know, the police officers should not have gotten involved. Or, you know, literally the only thing it seems like they would have been satisfied with is they had just let this girl stab this girl to death. The girl who wasn't doing anything to her. The girl who had a little dog in her hands. Apparently the cop was just supposed to stand there and let him, you know, and let her stab her. You know, that's one of the reasons why I pointed out that these guys, essentially, you start leaning towards a black supremacy energy, because Remember what I said to you guys earlier that Derek Jensen had told me was that, have you ever noticed this weird sociological phenomenon that violence is invisible so long as it's down the perceived social scale or within the perceived social scale? Meaning if it's the people that are considered to be superior in the hierarchy, anything that they do that is negative is invisible. But if for some reason somebody who is below on the social scale does something to people who's supposed to be higher up, then it's this huge social upheaval. Well, what do we have here? Right now, the energy that they're trying to pass around is that black people should be allowed to kill black people should be allowed to kill white people, and that's completely acceptable, no problem. But if a white person kills a black person, then they are automatically in need of just being, guilty and thrown in jail. Or rather, if a white person even kills other white people who happen to be allies of black people, they are automatically murderers and should just go to jail. See Kyle Rittenhouse. That's really the mentality that's going on here, folks, is that this is not about creating equality. This is about creating one race with privileges and one race without. And, what they claim is that it's already the other way around, but that's clearly not the case. Especially when you see like the case that I talked about earlier, where 3 jurors were not willing to convict a man who was guilty as a cat in a goldfish bowl. A black male broke into a woman's house, tied her up on a chair, stabbed her 22 times. DNA evidence everywhere. Everything was conclusive. And if you guys look back, I did a video about that case. But the point is that 3 of the jurors said, well, we can't convict him of murder because he's a black male. I won't be part of that. So it's just going to be manslaughter. And one of the jurors, who happened to be a white woman, was like, what the hell? And then as they're pronouncing the sentence, she finally had a change of heart. She's like, I'm not going along with this. And it ended up in a mistrial. And then when they got back in the jury room, these 3 jurors who wouldn't convict the guy of murder just because of his race, threatened her, said, if you were saying this in the street, we'd be beating your ass, et cetera, et cetera. That's what they want to create. It's just a reverse privilege, an inverse of the hierarchy. So the notion that we even needed to talk about this, that there needed to be a grand jury to see if there was going to be an indictment on whether or not this cop was in the wrong, is just insane. This, ironically, is the kind of special treatment that they claim supposedly goes on the other direction. Because a black person was killed by a white cop, automatically we need to have a serious reckoning in the situation. And if you remember, I think it was Kobe Bryant, but tweeted that same day, it's like, oh, now we have another one. We got Derek Chauvin. It's time to get this guy. And then they tried to they doxed this cop and, they needed to go after him. And again, there's no correct answer. If the guy had just stood there and let this girl stab this girl to death, then it would have been the other way around. It would have been, well, he should have done something and he didn't because it was a black girl getting killed. There's no correct answer with these people. This is how a witch hunt inquisition functions. The witch hunts during the Inquisitions went something like this. There was one of the ones that they would do is they would hog tie a girl, tie her legs and hands behind her back, and throw her in a body of water. And if she sank and drowned, then her soul was with God and she was innocent. If she managed to float somehow, then she was a witch and should be executed. That's how these people operate. You're guilty essentially no matter what. There's no way out for you. That's how these people operate. So in any case, I wanted to share some of my recent videos with you guys that I just did. And this also gives me an opportunity to share them with my Twitch streamer people. Hello to anybody on Twitch today. I haven't seen any Twitch comments today. I haven't really been doing what I should to try to cultivate my Twitch audience, but part of it is that I have a feeling that Twitch is not going to end up being friendly to me in the long run. So because it's not happy with any kind of intolerant. Basically, Twitch is not very tolerant of any kind of graphic footage, and I'm not going to stop the way I do things for Twitch. So in any case, the first one is going to be about whitewashing slavery. This is the second part of my series going after the show Everything's Going to Be All White. But it goes beyond just that. It's important for other reasons, because the slavery issue has been misidentified as supposedly a white original sin. And I'm going to go into that in the video. I'll just let myself do the talking.
Hello, everybody.
Once again, we are going to venture into Everything's Gonna Be All White. In this episode, part 2 of my series, I will be discussing this documentary's whitewashing of slavery. The spirit of what was going on in the clips, and some of which I can play because one of them was in the trailer, is to suggest in some way that slavery itself was a white institution or was created by white people, and that therefore white people collectively should feel some sort of remorse or responsibility or should be held responsible for slavery itself. And in this episode, I'm going to get into not only the ridiculous narrative that they're crafting, but also destroying it.
Should white people today feel any responsibility for slavery?
Hell yeah. So that's a clip taken from the trailer. I'm going to get into more as far as to what the content of this documentary, if you could call it that, basically it weaves as a narrative about slavery. But I also want to make it clear that this issue of whitewashing slavery is not unique just to this presentation on Showtime. The whitewashing of slavery is basically an ongoing theme when it comes particularly to dealing with, say, the 1619 Project or critical race theory. Remember, they want to tell a more complete version of history, and of course, it all has to center on the Atlantic slave trade. But if we're really going to do that, maybe we should actually take a closer look on how most of the Africans got into the basically the Atlantic slave trade to begin with. And first, I want to play a little clip of another documentary that actually gave an honest assessment of how it happens.
We can only begin to imagine the sheer horror of the slave trade. But what if we could place an actual ancestor within that story? We were able to do just that for one of Tom Joyner's ancestors, his third great-grandfather, Tony Dumas. Can you read where it lists Tony Dumas' birthplace? In the far right. Place of birth, Africa. Africa. Your great-great-great-grandfather, Tony Dumas, was born in Africa around 1790. We tracked down a direct male descendant of Tony's, a distant cousin of yours, and we asked him to take a DNA test to see where Tony was born. So if we found a match, that's where the brother came from. Would you mind turning the page of the scrapbook? This could mean your great-great-great-grandfather was a member of the Balanta people from the country of Guinea-Bissau. On the coast? On the coast. And it's an exact match. Yep. How do you think he was captured? Probably through a war. You know, there were African middlemen, and they would fight wars with other Africans to enslave them to sell to the white man. Slavery was a huge business for different African kingdoms. You know the story that we got when we were kids, that your ancestor was out on one Sunday with his girlfriend and some white man jumps out of the bush and throws a net over him? It's not how it happened. Slavery was big business. Africans sold other Africans to the Europeans.
Now, debunking the myth that supposedly Europeans just showed up in Africa and randomly abducted people, and that that's how the Atlantic slave trade worked, is important, but it's not the only issue we need to discuss when it comes to whitewashing slavery. Yes, one of the major points that is brought up constantly by the critical race theory types, the 1619 types, is that, again, we're not telling a complete version of history. So they would tell a version that just kind of leaves out the truth, which is that it wasn't a white industry. It was an industry practiced by people all over the world. But that doesn't fit with the demonization of quote-unquote whiteness that they're pushing for. So instead, we're just going to gloss over the fact that the people who were sold into the Atlantic slave trade were sold by other Black people, African kings who were generally engaged in imperialism, genocide, etc. And I have heard the twist that, oh, well, that's different. You see, we were nicer to our slaves in Africa, and the African kings didn't know about the horrible treatment that the slaves they would be they would be selling to these Europeans would get. And that's just crap. I'm sorry. It's okay. We have nicer slavery here. No, I'm sorry. I'm not buying it. That's bullshit. But again, it wasn't a white industry. Slavery was big business all over the world. Now let's discuss, first of all, the origins of slavery itself, since the narrative that is being weaved is to suggest that somehow slavery was like invented by white people. Now, according to this website, Slavery in History, that seems to have done the people who made it did an excellent job of sourcing everything. The first recorded slaves were in 6800 BC, and it happened in Mesopotamia. Now, where's Mesopotamia? Well, that would be the Middle East. So in other words, Arabs invented slavery, not white people, not Asian people, but apparently it was Arabs. Now, the only reason this is important, because first of all, I again think that blaming an entire race for anything is ridiculous, is that if there was, in fact, an inventor of slavery, it wasn't the dreaded white people. It happened to be Arabic people. And every race on the planet at one point or another engaged in slavery. So the only reason this is relevant is not to help them demonize someone else. I'm not demonizing all Arabic people for inventing this concept, but it doesn't change the fact that the narrative that they would like to share with you would be to suggest that somehow slavery itself is a white thing and that all white people are therefore responsible for it and should pay reparations for it. And that's just not logical. Now, building on that, since we've discussed the origins of slavery as far as to where and to when, we can also discuss who abolished it first. And the Arabic countries happen to be one of the worst in this particular category. And as many of the people who are studying modern slavery will tell you, it's still going on in a lot of these places, including in Africa, which we'll get into in a moment. But Turkey abolished slavery in 1933, Iraq in 1933, Iran in 1928, Saudi Arabia in 1962, and Egypt in 1904. I'm focusing mostly on the bigger countries at this point, but you get the idea. This is when these countries finally got rid of slavery, and some of those numbers are pretty damn late. So not only did they create it, they essentially perpetuated it longer than just about any culture on the earth. But definitely dominant as far as like countries that were the slowest to abolish slavery is Africa itself. You can see on here, and I'm not going to read them all off, but there's definitely a pattern that the African countries were some of the last, some as late as 1981. And it's still going on here. It's just not legal, but it still goes on. And it's not all perpetuated by the evil white man that lives there. In many cases, it's still enforced by the people who live there, who are predominantly people of color. So again, if slavery was this horrible atrocity that was only practiced by white people, well, that's obviously just not true. It's not true in any way. So why is it that we constantly have to perpetuate this lie? And it's because of the fact that slavery is like the original sin to their religion. That, all white people should be held accountable for this, as if it was white people's invention, as if white people perpetuated it. And as if you remember from my video where I played that video from The Root with the Rutgers professor who basically just lied and said that critical race theory is about having an honest, unfiltered version of history, she would tell you, and she did in that video, that supposedly people of color were traveling the oceans and peacefully trading with each other before white people showed up, and that black people never engaged in this sort of thing. I'll link that video in the description. But again, if this is the issue, it's the issue of like who abolished slavery. Well, Africa was pretty damn late to the party. But again, I promise I will get to the white people, but first let's look at the Asian people, since they're also represented in that film as being the oppressed class that is just constantly being put down by the white people. China didn't abolish slavery until 1910, Japan until 1945, and the caveat here is that they had abolished like general slavery before that, but they had kept it legal to have comfort women, which were basically functionally property sex slaves, and that wasn't abolished until 1945. The Mongols in Mongolia didn't until 1957, and in Korea, slavery wasn't abolished until 1930. So again, this is supposedly a white industry perpetuated by whites, created by whites, and that's just bullshit. So now I picked some of the major European countries that were known for imperialism and slavery. And, well, the reality is this: the European countries, by and large, with some exceptions, abolished slavery faster than anybody else. The very first country to abolish slavery was Haiti, and hats off to them. But these numbers are a hell of a lot better than Asia or Africa. We have the USA at 1865, the United Kingdom 1833, Germany 1807, France 1848, Spain 1811, Russia 1906, that's Portugal 1836, and Canada at 1834. Now, one of the people that they brought on to discuss this, basically in the ongoing theme of every race ganging up on white people that goes on in this show quite a bit, they also brought on this guy. And one of the things that he shared was a story of an indigenous person who was just astonished at the notion that, that George Washington owned like 300 slaves. Like, it was just such a horrible abomination. How could that ever be possible? And the theme again is that to indigenous people, the notion of slavery was just this crazy idea. So again, they have to perpetuate the idea that slavery was just a white people thing. And they also tend to want to only focus on the Atlantic slave trade. They always want to talk about just the United States. But the reason why they do that is because if they had to take in the concept of slavery in its totality, it would not fit the narrative. And they'd have to take a little, look at themselves and their own culture's roles in slavery. But okay, since you want to focus on the Atlantic slave trade and what happened in the colonies, it just so happens that, as this person points out in their article here, Ryan Smith, how Native American slaveholders complicate the Trail of Tears narrative. And in this, he goes on to detail that, in fact, particularly people of the Cherokee Nation owned slaves and kept the slaves and took the slaves with them on the Trail of Tears. So this all kind of shatters the notion that this was, again, just some kind of white American thing that was only done by white Americans to Black people who were brought to America. And it's just a lie. It's just not true. Let's go ahead and read a little bit of this. When you think of the Trail of Tears, you likely imagine a long procession of suffering Cherokee Indians forced westward by a villainous Andrew Jackson. Perhaps you envision unscrupulous white slaveholders whose interest in growing a plantation economy underlay the decision to expel the Cherokee, flooding in to take their place east of the Mississippi River. What you probably don't picture are Cherokee slaveholders, foremost among them Cherokee Chief John Ross. What you probably don't picture are the numerous African American slaves Cherokee owned who made the brutal march themselves, or else were shipped en masse to what is now Oklahoma aboard cramped boats by their wealthy Indian masters. And what you may not know is that the federal policy of Indian removal, which ranged far beyond the Trail of Tears and the Cherokee, was not simply the vindictive scheme of Andrew Jackson, but rather a popularly endorsed, congressionally sanctioned campaign spanning the administrations of 9 separate presidents. Remember, we have to tell the whole story, guys. We can't leave out any little details like the fact that, oh, wait a second, you mean the indigenous people were holding slaves even, in the Atlantic slave trade? What was the term for that again? Oh, yeah, man, right in the narrative. So was it just the Cherokee? Nope. If that's what you think, you'd be wrong. In this book by Barbara Crathamer, Black Slaves, Indian Masters, they detail that the Choctaw and Chickasaw Indians bought, sold, and owned Africans and African Americans as slaves, a fact that persisted after the tribe's removal from the Deep South to Indian Territory. So it's not just the Cherokee. And this just kind of, again, comes back to the point that this was not just a white thing, guys. This is just something humans, unfortunately, have done to each other for hundreds of thousands of years. Another article that I'll share in the description of this video discusses East Africa's forgotten slave trade and how over several centuries, countless East Africans were sold as slaves by Muslim Arabs to the Middle East and other places via the Sahara Desert and Indian Ocean. Experts say it's time for this to be discussed more openly. And again, this points to the Arabic origins of slavery. And again, I don't feel that all Arabs are responsible for that at all. In fact, unless they're currently enslaving people, which is still taking place in some Arabic countries, They're not responsible. And we need to get over this idea that we can hold an entire, race of people because of their common skin pigment accountable for things done by, other people that they have nothing to do with, that they're not related to, crimes that were committed by people that are not you. That's kind of the whole essence again of of racism, is that the idea that the Ku Klux Klan wants to be able to hold all black people accountable for the FBI crime statistics. It's wrong, but it's just as wrong to try to suggest that somehow all white people are accountable for slavery. And it's just not true. In fact, nobody who is white in the United States right now had anything to do with slavery. So the notion that we should in some way feel responsible for it, again, you cannot, there's collective guilt is logically fallacious. It makes no sense. But that's the narrative that they want to craft, that supposedly this is a white thing, only white people do this, and therefore only white people should be held accountable for it. And again, it's just bullshit. And as this article points out, slavery's last stronghold is in a country named Mauritania, provided that I said that correctly. But slavery is still a problem in this country. And again, it's black people enslaving black people. There's no Europeans to blame this on. This is going on over there right now. So I hope that people will take a longer look at the history, but not just the history, but what's currently going on to perpetuate slavery. Slavery is horrible. It's one of the most atrocious things that we have ever done to each other as humans. But note I said humans. I didn't say white humans, black humans, red humans, yellow humans, what the fuck ever. We're all humans. That's really, really what they don't want us to realize, that we are one people, one species on this earth. They want us divided so that they can conquer us. I'm not playing the game. I don't make my skin pigment the center of my identity. It's just a descriptive, adjective of the way I appear. It has no other purpose to me. Thanks again for tuning in, guys. Please like, subscribe, ring the bell. You can visit my website. Okay, so that was just one of them. I got one more, but to comment a little bit on what's going on in the chat. Yes, and it's an interesting point to make that those cultures were already enslaving each other before any Europeans showed up. That's an interesting point. As Skillet Pan point out, especially some of the Native American cultures were just downright imperialistic. Would conquer smaller countries, more nations, I guess you would call them, within the area. They engaged in genocide. Another commenter pointed out that sometimes they would engage in human sacrifice on their slaves, which usually amounted to like brutally cutting their hearts out. But one of the things about everything's going to be all white is it's definitely framed from this perspective that like they have like Asian speakers, and then they have Arabic speakers, and then they have like, it's literally everybody ganging up on white people. And then the only white person they have in there is like literally a parody of white people, essentially. He is every stereotype that they want for the white male. And they bring that up constantly in that movie. And it's funny to me, it's like, and I realize now I should have made the point about it, but one of the main characters, not characters, but speakers that they use, and everything's going to be all white, is an Arabic woman. And come to find out, well, slavery started in the Arabic countries of Mesopotamia. Oh, look at that. So this next video is the 6th part in my Do You Think for Yourself series. And if you guys haven't checked that out, it's kind of at the core of why I made this channel, or at least why I, make so much content, and like what was motivating me, and the reason why it's more important to me to discuss whether or not we're thinking than it is whether or not we're right or left. We can worry about right versus left later. I think we have bigger problems. And that's what the Do You Think for Yourself series is about. And this was actually in response to a trans issue, as I'll explain in the video. But this goes over the fact that, you guys have heard me for a long time point out that there are periods of your life where your brain isn't even fully developed. And the one that specifically is involved with long-term consequences isn't even functioning, until like your mid to late 20s and sometimes as late as 30. So that plays into a lot of this because a lot of the weird leftist narrative right now is to imply that children can make, complex decisions. And that's not just about the trans issue. The ones that are trying to like normalize pedophilia say the same thing. And obviously, in typical V Radio fashion, which is another thing, like for those two videos, or well, this one and the one I just showed you, if you go to the original videos, you'll see all my receipts. I have a shitload of sources, credible sources that are not right-wing or left-wing sources that are available that you guys can use when you're arguing these issues. So first, I'm going to go ahead and share this with you guys, and thanks for tuning into V Radio.
Hello, everybody. I decided the best way for me to handle a recent piece of information that was given to me was by doing another episode of my series, Do You Think for Yourself? This series is me examining different ways in which your thinking may not be as clear as you believe it is, and may not be as independent of the influences of others as you probably believe. In this instance, however, we're going to be discussing the brain itself. This is actually a response in some way to an issue that came up recently in regards to trans issues, because certain trans activists are making the suggestion that young children are fully capable of making very complex, long-term consequence decisions. And you've heard me mention multiple times throughout the course of me doing this channel's content that there is science that shows that this is not the case. That in fact, the brain, the portion of it that can comprehend long-term consequences, isn't even functioning in most humans until their mid to late 20s. This is why you think you know everything when you're 18, and why when you look back on the time that you were 18, you were like, Jesus, I'm an idiot. Or I was an idiot. You look back on decisions you made, things that you thought, and it made perfect sense at the time. But you have to be fair to yourself. The reality is your brain was not capable of comprehending long-term consequences with any real serious depth at that point. And it's true of everybody. It's not just you. Everybody goes through this. And this is also, I feel, why one of the major reasons why colleges have become a great place for people with an agenda to target humanity is because they're still highly susceptible to suggestion and manipulation at that age. And I know that there are exceptions to this, and actually we will talk a little bit about what you can do to try to make this as irrelevant to you as a person, if you happen to be a young person watching this, as possible. There are exercises you can do with your mind that lead to development happening faster in certain areas. So misinformation is being fed to the populace in regards to this. Misinformation, the big boogeyman. The thing is that the science has been established about this for quite some time. So let's take a look at this piece of a presentation of an actual medical doctor, as in accredited and certified, who performs surgeries on trans individuals at very young ages, suggesting that children are in fact capable of making long-term consequence decisions, which is scientifically unsound.
Well, I'm just going to say this, that actually people get married when they're under 20. Actually, people choose colleges to go to. Actually, people make life-altering decisions in adolescence. All the time. All the time. And honestly, most of them are good. It's just the bad ones that we talk about. Oh my God, the cinnamon challenge, right? I mean, why do we know about it? Because it's a thing, and it's not common. Like most teenagers aren't eating cinnamon, right? But some are, and they're on YouTube, and that's stupid. But we don't put on YouTube the things that are really good decisions, right? Oh my gosh, my kid took the SATs. Not a very exciting after-school special, right? But so what we do know is that adolescents actually have the capacity to make a reasoned, logical decision. And here's the other thing about chest surgery. If you want breasts at a later point in your life, you can go and get them.
So the woman that you just saw basically blatantly lying to students about the state of the human brain as a child is an accredited, as I pointed out earlier, accredited, educated doctor, an actual MD, and a surgeon who performs trans surgeries on young children and claims, as you just saw, that they're fully capable of making long-term consequence decisions. And it's interesting to me, you know, looking at her mannerisms and her pictures. I'm not even sure how old she is. Obviously, she's a doctor, but she looks to be in her mid-20s at most herself. So, who knows? But regardless, let's now take a moment and look at the science that apparently this doctor is either not aware of or is just consciously lying about. In typical V-Radio fashion, I come with receipts and sources. There will be multiple sources that I will be quoting from for the purpose of this presentation. Some of it will seem a little redundant, but it's to nail down the point that this person, despite being an accredited, actual medical doctor and surgeon, is apparently, again, either intentionally lying or hopelessly ignorant. The University of Rochester Medical Center's Health Encyclopedia. Understanding the teen brain. It doesn't matter how smart teens are or how well they scored on the SAT or the ACT. Good judgment isn't something they can excel in, at least not yet. The rational part of a teen's brain isn't fully developed and won't be until age 25 or so. In fact, recent research has found that adult and teen brains work differently. Adults think with the prefrontal cortex, the brain's rational part. This is the part of the brain that responds to situations with good judgment and an awareness of long-term consequences. Teens process information with the amygdala. This is the emotional part. In teens' brains, the connections between the emotional part of the brain and the decision-making center are still developing, and not always at the
Yes, now I know it's called the amygdala. I've never had to say that word out loud. Anyway, here we go.
The same rate. That's why when teens have overwhelming emotional input, they can't explain later what they were thinking. They weren't thinking as much as they were feeling. Let's look at that again. They weren't thinking as much as they were feeling. This is at the core of so many of the philosophical arguments you see currently in politics. The facts don't care about your feelings, or people want how they feel to be more important than what is true. So, how this relates to you when you're a young person or talking to a young person, I guess, and you're trying to determine if you think for yourself, you have to be aware of the fact that age, as far as like maturity, is not just about a length of experience. It's about your brain's capacity to even be able to effectively process the information. So the reality is this: it's like essentially the hardware itself is not even developed yet to fully be able to comprehend long-term consequences. In other words, it would be as if, the computer just simply didn't have that component yet. And as a consequence, no amount of information is necessarily going to be able to override your emotions in this situation. And that's the reason why people, seek the aid of their parents, because their parents do have, this portion of their brains functioning. If their brain, again, was a computer, then their computer happens to have that component. It's that simple. If you don't have that component, it would be like a computer without a video card trying to process video information. It doesn't matter how much video information you share with the computer. If it doesn't have a video card, it's not going to process that information. If it doesn't have a Wi-Fi card, it doesn't matter how much information you try to send that way. It doesn't have Wi-Fi equipped. So I think I've beaten that to death, but you get the point. The point is that it doesn't matter how much information they've been given. Their feelings are going to be more important to them than what their logic centers would say, because their logic centers are just not fully developed yet. In this peer-reviewed article, which I will link in the description, Adolescent Maturity and the Brain, the Promise and Pitfalls of Neuroscience Research and Adolescent Health Policy. Among the many behavior changes that have been noted for teens, the three that are most robustly seen across cultures are 1. Increased novelty seeking, 2. Increased risk-taking, and 3. A social affiliation shift toward peer-based interactions. Now, increased novelty seeking is one of the things that a lot of people are concerned has a lot to do with why kids are going to college and then suddenly deciding they're trans or something else. Increased risk taking is common, obviously. And if you have increased risk taking, but at the same time, you do not have a developed long-term consequence part of your brain functioning, then this is just going to be more dangerous. And then the social affiliation shift toward peer-based interactions means that you start listening to your friends more than you do to your parents. And it says this triad of behavior changes is seen not only in human beings, but in nearly all social mammals. Although the behaviors may lead to danger, they confer an evolutionary advantage by encouraging separation from the comfort and safety of the natal family, which decreases the chances of inbreeding. So, yes, you should be getting out into the world and interacting with people that are not your family, but this is also what leads to people distrusting their parents and no longer wanting to listen to them. And of course, how many teenagers have you heard say, you just don't understand? Well, the problem is that it's not that your parent is incapable of understanding. It's that you're actually not capable of understanding why you're wrong. And it's not because you're stupid. And it's not because you haven't had any experiences. It's because of the fact that, again, that part of your brain isn't even functioning yet. And further, from a different part of the article, evidence from animal studies suggests that the neural connections between the amygdala, a limbic structure involved in emotional processing, especially of fear and vigilance, and the cortices that comprise the frontal lobes becomes denser during adolescence. These connections integrate emotional and cognitive processes and result in what is often considered to be emotional maturity, e.g., the ability to regulate and interpret emotions. The evidence suggests that this integration process continues to develop well into adulthood. So again, it's just not working yet. Steinberg, Dahl, and others have hypothesized that a temporal gap between the development of socio-emotional system of the brain, which experiences an early development surge around puberty, and the cognitive control system of the brain, which extends through late adolescence, underlies some aspects of risk-taking behavior. This temporal gap has been compared with starting the engine of a car without the benefit of a skilled driver. Here's another source, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. We'll go down here. It says, changing brains mean that adolescents act differently from adults. Pictures of the brain in action show that adolescent brains work differently than adults when they make decisions or solve problems. Their actions are guided more by the emotional and reactive amygdala and less by the thoughtful, logical frontal cortex. Research has also shown that exposure to drugs and alcohol during the teen years can change or delay these developments. Based on the stage of their brain development, adolescents are more likely to act on impulse, misread or misinterpret social cues and emotions, get into accidents of all kinds, get involved in fights, engage in dangerous or risky behavior, and they are less likely to think before they act, pause to consider the consequences of their actions, change their dangerous or inappropriate behaviors. These brain differences don't mean that young people can't make good decisions or tell the difference between right and wrong. It also doesn't mean that they shouldn't be held responsible for their actions. However, an awareness of these differences can help parents, teachers, advocates, and policymakers understand, anticipate, and manage the behavior of adolescents. So it makes it very clear that they are less likely to pause and consider the consequences of their actions, including permanent consequences. So once again, I'm just beating this to death, but this is another source, American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, accredited, that's telling you that what this lady just said to that entire classroom is just totally inaccurate. And she is making the decision to permanently alter people's bodies based on this inaccurate information. By the way, as a brief side note to those of you who might have children that are very young, this is also true of tantrums. Children are not always consciously difficult when they throw tantrums. The amygdala has detected a threat, and the hypothalamus sent the message that causes your child to react. Without quite understanding why, she or he might experience tense muscles, a racing heartbeat, sweaty hands, and the urge to kick or throw herself to the floor. Though try as you might to reason with her, she likely won't listen. But why? Because the stress response that they are experiencing can reduce the already limited capacity that they have for self-control, a function associated with the prefrontal cortex. So this is more in reference to really young children, 5 years and younger. But the point is that the reason why they have tantrums is because, again, the part of their brain that can process these emotions and, essentially enables self-control so that you don't overreact, is once again, it's not even installed yet. We'll call it installed. It's not developed. It hasn't happened yet. So literally they are incapable of handling this. So this is important to parents because I tell them this is why you can't take tantrums personally. I'm not saying that you should just allow tantrum activity to go on. Obviously, you need to do something about it because they have to be able to adapt later on. But it doesn't change the fact that, once again, this is an example of a situation where, try as someone might, if this part of their brain isn't working, then it doesn't matter. They can't control themselves. They can't think for themselves. That's why we take care of young children. So now, bringing this around full circle, how does this impact you? When I did this episode, I initially was thinking perhaps I would make another trans issues episode, but I realized, as I said at the beginning, this applies to a lot of things. And therefore, the trans example that I am giving is just one of many that you will probably see, going on in society around you. But if you happen to be young, under 20, or if you happen to be in your early 20s, be aware of the fact that it's extremely likely that even if you think that you've thought something out, in a great deal of depth, that the truth is there are multiple things going on in your brain at that time that are essentially at war with your rational logic center. One of them is going to be, as I mentioned earlier, that it is natural that your brain is going to try to get you to seek peer acceptance over the acceptance of your parents. That's the whole teenage rebellion phase. And I'm not saying that you have to just do everything your parents say. I didn't really get along with, my father, for example, and cut him out of my life, probably, I think he was like 15 years old. He was a really toxic person. So I don't feel that was unjustified. But my mother, on the other hand, went out of her way to be sure that I had these critical thinking skills. This kind of comes back to what I said earlier. If you don't like this, if you want to fix this, there are things you can do to encourage your development here. And that is to hold yourself accountable, to very, carefully, critically analyze and think about things. Test yourself. Put yourself in a situation, wherein you have to do this. Because one of the things that it'll say, it says actually in the articles that I will link in the description, is that people who spend more time trying to make these connections, because this is what it is. There's a part of your brain that handles logic, and there's a part of your brain that handles emotion, and they're not communicating very well until your brain is finished developing. So you can, essentially kind of help make those connections yourself by putting yourself in a situation where you plug your logic center into what's going on in your emotions. If you continually practice this, you can help these portions of your brain develop more quickly. And you can already see that because I've met children, for example, who are way better at this than others, and then come to find out they were raised in such a way that, essentially, stimulated this part of the brain. And as a consequence, those kids grew up a lot, I don't want to say smarter, but basically just more capable of, managing their emotions. When I was young, I think it was about 16, my mother didn't even really have what I would call a curfew for me. And it wasn't because she didn't care. It's because at 16 years old, I had already come to the conclusion that I wasn't interested in drugs or drinking or getting a girl pregnant when I was too young to be a parent, etc. She knew with confidence that we had had long conversations about it. And then I had come to my own conclusions that were the correct ones, that these were not wise behavior. Not every parent really encourages their kid to make these kinds of decisions. And I think the problem is that parents are essentially being told by the woke types that they should just be hands off, or maybe we should just set up schools so that the parents can't interfere when we come to, change their point of view, change the point of view of their children. Parents themselves are being demonized, etc. And all that really is them just trying to take advantage of these children before they have the ability to critically think for themselves. As I've described to you multiple times on this channel in multiple episodes, specifically the ones about how critical race theory and wokeism is getting into our education system, their hope is to try to get to these kids before, their prefrontal cortex is fully developed. And they want to teach them that their emotions are more important than their rational logic centers. And that's an effort to try to control you. It's an agenda. It's just indoctrination of the young. So if you're a young person and you're listening to this, be aware of the fact that certain parts of your brain are just not working yet, and they will. And the more you try to use them, the more early in your development as a person, they will come into fruition. In the meantime, though, you should find people who are older than you that you trust to talk these things over with you. And you should be part of that whole process. You should be sitting down and talking to them about these consequences that your brain may not even literally be able to comprehend yet. And if you're an older person listening to this, take a moment and think back to the things, because this is really important. It's just like the parent who has to understand not to take it personally when their kid is having a tantrum. If you happen to be, looking at a teenager and talking to them, you've got to recognize and have empathy for the fact that you too once were a 16, 17, 18-year-old, and that you too once thought you knew everything. And just remember back to yourself. Think back to who you were when you were that age and the kind of decisions that you made, that you probably shouldn't have made, but they seemed like the right idea at the time. And use that empathy and understanding when you're communicating with young people, because the truth of the matter is it's like two computers trying to interact with one another, and one of them does not have the software or hardware to be able to, engage in that interaction. Well, what happens? Then there's a communication error. And that's what's going on. So anyway, as far as how this applies to do you think for yourself, just to cap it off, be aware of the fact that your brain goes through stages of development. And at certain stages of development, not only are you more susceptible to just accepting whatever your peers say, even if it's not correct, because your brain is literally trying to get you to leave the nest. And two, be aware of the fact that your ability to comprehend long-term consequences is likely not even functioning yet, and that you should consult with people that you trust, not because, just because they're older or wiser, but because their brains are functioning better than yours. And that's just the way it is, at least for now. And then when you get older, you too can look at your kids and say, well, when you're older, you'll understand. Have a good day, guys. Thanks for listening.
All right. So I just wanted to share those with you guys who pretty much are the ones who only listen to my streams, who may or may not have already seen those. Thanks for tuning in today. I saw we had a new user in the chat, so welcome. You guys, if you haven't already, especially since I'm still getting reports that people are not always getting notifications when I go live, you can go to v-radio.us, where you can find me on YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute. The podcast link takes you to the various places you can listen to my podcast. I make podcast versions of my show. If it's not super visually oriented, and it's on a bunch of different platforms. My Fans of V-Radio Facebook group. You can support me on Patreon, PayPal. I do have a Subscribe Star, but I'm not pushing it too hard right now. I'm also on Telegram, Discord, and Getter. I'm also on Twitter. So the reason that I'm telling you guys to go and add me on these is that in a lot of cases, I got viewers who the only reason they even knew that I made a new video is because it popped up on my Telegram channel or my Discord. So, and I'm also, yes, and I am on Getter. I don't have as many followers there, but if you want to follow me there, I do post stuff there. So thanks again for tuning in today, guys. Take a look here at the chat before I take off. Yes, great point on the short versus long-term growth of the brain. And this is really important because it just so happens that most of the people that we're arguing with right now, a lot of them are people whose this part of their brain isn't working yet. It's just that simple. And as a consequence of that, they're not going to understand. But other people do understand that the parts of their brain are not working yet. So that's why they're trying to reach them. Because if you can indoctrinate somebody when they're younger, it's a lot easier because they don't have the long-term consequence portion working against them. So this is probably a boomer chat. I do have young people who watch this show quite a bit, actually. I look at the demographics all the time. Going back, to my podcast, it showed people as young as 14, I guess. So, but yeah. So in any case, if you guys do want to financially support the show, I would appreciate it. I'm still not really in a good situation. I can't work They're doing their best right now to try to figure out what's wrong with me, but I constantly have problems with the medical system because, for example, they keep claiming that I said that my back hurts. Now, my coccyx, meaning my tailbone, hurts, but what's going on with my back isn't pain. It's that some of the muscles in my back just don't work. Like they don't come. Like I guess they don't turn on. So as a consequence of that, I can't stand up for more than about 30 or 40 seconds before I start to feel my back go into muscle failure. So it doesn't hurt. It feels weak and it won't do its job. And they did finally find out through the MRI that I have a damage to L5S1 and L4, L5, whatever that is, but like the lower portions of the spine that are close to the coccyx. So that makes sense since this initially happened from me falling off the back of a rowing machine and smashing that part of my body against a metal rail that's on a rowing machine. And it didn't start right away. That's the screwed up thing. Like I had pain, but the problems with my back not working didn't happen until months later. And one day I was at work standing at my cash register, and then all of a sudden my back muscles started trembling like they were about to give out. And I was like, what the hell? And I literally had to catch myself on the counter because I was about to fall. Like, as in I couldn't hold myself up. But back then it would take like an hour or so to kick in. So I could still like get around, like I could go into say a small store or a gas station. And nowadays, I can get out to my car. That's about it. I can't travel much further than that without a walker. And it's funny because sometimes people look at me with my walker and they're like, man, you're going pretty fast. I'm like, it's because there's nothing wrong with my legs. I need this walker because I can't hold myself upright. So I decided to go ahead, and that's one of the reasons why that's initial video here is I was at Crossroads for like the first year and a half of me doing content for you guys. I did not take any money, particularly during the Kyle Rittenhouse stuff. People were just trying to throw money at me, and I was like, nah, just donate it to Kyle, because I didn't really want to have a financial relationship with my work. And that's why even if I do get, even if I do get a significant amount of money from this, I'm only looking at making like basically making myself whole to what I was making with my crappy restaurant job. I'm not looking to make a lot. And it's because of the fact that I noticed back when I did make a lot doing this, like back in 2008-ish, I was bringing in between $1,000 to $3,000 a month in donations. It changes your relationship with it. And then you find yourself in a position where it's like, well, now my financial well-being has to do with me making certain kinds of content, and fuck that, not doing it. It's one of the reasons why this time around I've been trying to cultivate an audience that accepts the fact that you're not always going to agree with everything I say. And I don't want you to. That's not really the goal of what I do here. My goal is not to try to create a Vosh or Stefan Molyneux style audience that just, sits there with bated breath waiting to hear everything I say. If that's not what I'm about. And that's why I'm actually very happy with the fact that I have a lot of different people who tell me that, I don't agree with everything you say, but I really like, the way you speak the truth as you understand it. And, you're careful to have sources, because that's how I want everybody to start acting again. I want us to be able to disagree, like people used to be able to do. Like we used to be able to have disagreements. It's like one of the things I said when I was on Good Logic stream was like, I don't agree with everything America has done, but I still consider myself an American. And that means that, like I think Dennis Kucinich, for example, great congressman back in the day, tried to impeach George Bush, really big on the Constitution, said that the eagle needs 2 wings to fly. I think what's going on now is that if you're not on the same wing, you're not even human to the other side. Like if you're not left enough, if you're not right enough. And I'm not playing that game. It's fucking bullshit. I lean left on a lot of things, but I lean right on a lot of things. And I think that's actually how humans are supposed to think. Like when I had Brett Weinstein on, we talked about that. I think that there's a really unnatural state of things when we're supposed to accept this pre-packaged like version of politics, because I'm like, for example, very pro-gun. I have a carbine with 100-round drum sitting like 6 feet from me right now. Very pro-gun, but I'm also, say, pro-healthcare. I do believe that we should have some kind of public option. So where do I fit? I apparently don't fit anywhere. And that's just bullshit. Even people who are poor or who care about, social programs should be allowed to be pro-gun. But in our current situation, you can't. And the funny thing is, I also meet conservatives who are coming around to believing, you know what, maybe we do need a public option, or maybe we do need a UBI. But if they were to say that publicly, then they would be chastised for it. And that's fucking bullshit, man. Gabriel's like, you have a drum? Yeah, you're goddamn right I do. 100 fucking rounds, man. I ain't even playing. I got that thing when this crap started because you have no idea what'll happen. So yeah, it's a drum. Holds a lot of fucking rounds. And it's because I ain't running out of ammo. If they show up at my house, they better be ready because I ain't fucking around. I don't brandish it or anything, but I am prepared. When this all started, everybody was concerned about riots and all that. So start a drum circle. That's what we need. We need a circle of people with high caliber carbines with large drums. Somebody says you can't have a one party system. Right, we should have a no-party system. The way the founding fathers had originally envisioned it, there weren't going to be parties. That's why the political parties are not in the Constitution. And it's funny how many people are not aware of that. They don't understand that, yep, you got the right idea, Scarlock. That's exactly what I was thinking. Because these fuckers have doxed me in the past, and I'm like, yeah, well, that's not going to fucking change a damn thing for me, Ironically, what they doxed me over was my video about trans athletes in sports. That's what pissed them off enough to try to find out where I was and threaten me. But I live in a very conservative little farm town, so Antifa wouldn't last long here, to be honest. So coming up on Monday, I will have a stream with Paul Rossi, the teacher who helped me. He came on my stream a long time ago, actually. You guys can listen to that. It wasn't a stream at the time. It was a podcast, but you guys can listen to that in my podcast playlist. Paul Rossi was a teacher who was a whistleblower on the critical race theory being injected into the New York school system. He's going to be coming on to discuss with us some weird Black Lives Matter stuff that's basically almost like cult-like indoctrination that Black Lives Matter is trying to put into the school systems. And he just did an article about it. So we're gonna bring him on and we're gonna talk about that. So Therese, I will talk to you about this, but I will do so under the understanding that it's important that you, as a viewer of my work, understand that you agreeing with me about this is not a requirement for you to listen to my stuff or even agree with other things. What public healthcare system have I seen that works? Well, there's a funny story that goes on when it comes to discussing social democrats or democratic socialism with people who are conservative, because they will usually say, I'm totally open. Well, yeah, you're in the right place. They will usually say, well, Bernie Sanders is lying. Denmark isn't a socialist country, which is not actually what Bernie was trying to say. But they will say, Denmark's not a socialist country. It's a capitalist country. And then I'll say, okay, well, earlier you were saying that if we were to have public health care, then that would make us a socialist country, right? Yeah. Okay, well, Denmark has that, along with Finland, Canada, in fact, pretty much most of the civilized world. So, and then Skillet Pan says that Australia's system works okay, and I've had people from England tell me that they like theirs. I've had people from Canada tell me that they like theirs. I'm kind of on the Tulsi Gabbard side, that I think that a public option is probably the next step, and honestly the best step. I understand what Bernie was trying to do is that he doesn't want the public option to have to compete with the private options. But really what it comes down to is this. So let me ask you this, is if you think the system is working correctly, so go back to your initial question. Do I feel that, say, for example, there's a good documentary, and I should look up the name of it because you guys really need to watch it. But that Skrelly guy who raised the price of the EpiPen was on the picture because he was more well known. But the documentary started off with saying, everybody was talking about Martin Skrelly, but they should really be talking about this other guy. And unfortunately, I don't remember his name, but they went on to discuss this company that literally all they do is buy smaller drug companies so that they can buy drug patents so that they can raise the price of drugs with inelastic demand. Inelastic demand meaning the concept in finances that there are certain products that have inelastic demand, like it's like you can't just choose not to have this thing. So one of the things that this documentary pointed out was that this company purchased the patent to a drug that helps people with a rare condition that their body cannot process copper. People tend to forget that there's copper in our food. I learned that there's copper in our food because if you look on cereal boxes, you will see that copper is in your food. Well, if this woman didn't have this drug, she would die within a month. And so this company purchased the patent on that drug and then jacked the price up to the point that now she pays $100,000 a year to live. Like that's where we're at. That to me, that should just not be allowed. That shouldn't be legal in any way. When Martin Shkreli raised the price of the EpiPen, he did it because, again, inelastic demand. He was fully aware of the fact that the kids who need these need them. And it's children usually who need an EpiPen. Because if they get bit by a bee and nobody does anything within, I think it's within a minute, they will just die right there. Horribly die, choking to death. And they raised the price on it. And when you watch that guy being talked to, he's like, well, actually, this was all very altruistic. It was altruistic for him to raise the fucking price of that pen. Now we're talking about drug prices, and I agree. Most people do agree. Okay, well, yeah, that's a problem. I would say that in general, there are certain things that we as mankind interact with that should not be profit motivated. And people say, well, but you need to have profit motivation because if you don't, then there's no innovation. Okay, well, interesting point, because there was another article I read about that specific issue. There was a company that was very close to developing a drug that had a lot of promise to fix a problem. It's a rare disease that kills children usually by the time they're about 9 or 10 years old. They have severe seizures and it doesn't stop. So they had this drug that showed a lot of promise. The company abandoned the project and instead focused their money on illness drugs that are more common, for more common illnesses. So in other words, profit motivation in that situation, something that Jacques Fresco and Roxanne Meadows of the Venus Project used to point out is that, yeah, capitalist profit motive can spur innovation, but only if it's a profitable innovation. If there's something that would eliminate profit or something that wasn't profitable, then no such innovation takes place. And problem is with insurance companies too. Yes, I would agree. And they're fully aware of the fact that they are part of the problem, and they have a huge lobby as a consequence. So yes, you would pay some more taxes. I don't disagree with that. I understand it. But the funny thing is, I pointed out in my video specifically about this topic because people kept asking me why I supported Bernie Sanders in the last election. You can go to my channel and you will find my video explaining it. There is a concept called upward mobility. Upward mobility is essentially a descriptive of a society, like a category for a society that determines how likely your children are to be more wealthy than you. And really, the funny thing that came about from looking at this, because they did studies of all the major countries on Earth, and the number one country to live in to have upward mobility, that is that the likelihood that your children will be more wealthy than you is Denmark. Followed, I believe, by Finland, and then all the Nordic model countries. All of those have the highest upward mobility. It's supposed to be the American dream. The idea that you can do better for yourself and then, do better than your children is supposed to be the American dream. Well, the United States is ranked number 28 in upward mobility. Even Hong Kong is higher than the United States. So what does that mean? Well, in Denmark, they have a different social contract with the people that live there, and the people of Denmark, including the wealthy people who live there, recognize that their lives in general are going to be better if everybody in society is doing better. So that's at the fundamentals of it. So is that what I support? Yes, I do believe that people should work together to take care of each other. one of the things that I discovered when I went to Occupy was that you expect, because initially I just went there as a reporter, basically just independent journalist. And I was expecting to run into a bunch of leftist hippie types. But I also, because it was in Detroit, ran into an awful lot of former blue-collar conservatives who did everything you're supposed to do. They started new businesses. They got re-educated, whatever, and they still ended up homeless. They did everything you're supposed to do, and they still ended up homeless. So they ended up at the Occupy camp participating in a leftist protest against government and bank corruption because of the fact that there is a bottom to the capitalist system. And it doesn't mean we should be communists, but we need to recognize that there's a bottom. And once you get stuck down there, then it's really hard to get back out, especially during a recession, you know. So in any case, Casual Goat says, I just heard Tim Pool in my head saying he was an Occupy. Yeah, I'd like to talk to him about his experience. The funny thing is I believe I saw him at Occupy Detroit. Like, I literally think he showed up because they were visitors from Wall Street. I remember a guy with a beanie. I was like, shit, I probably saw Tim Pool off in the distance. So, and Scarlock, this is a common conversation I have with libertarians and or free market anarcho-capitalists, is that we can just do away with charity. Do away with welfare and replace it with charity. I understand where you're coming from if everybody in that society happens to be decent. But the thing that's really funny to me is that the same people that will tell me this are often really big fans of Ayn Rand. And Ayn Rand writes that charity is immoral. Ayn Rand writes that selfishness is a virtue. And I'm supposed to believe that in an anarcho-capitalist society, when the majority of anarcho-capitalists happen to usually be big fans of Ayn Rand, you know, that's the moral society that they want to live in, you know, and that's the society that's supposed to replace welfare with charity. So, you know, but what I was going to say is that now welfare reform certainly needs to happen. It needs to be designed in such a way to make people independent of it. That's what goes on in Denmark. That's why they have more upward mobility. Yes, they have a bunch more social safety nets. The safety nets are meant to keep you out of that bottom of the economy that's basically, you know, coated with ice and you're trying to get out of it. You know, so there needs to be a reform to make people independent of it. You know, there's no question about that. And that's why I advocate, you know, maybe more than free college, we should just be like, you know, setting up trade schools so that kids can get into these trades. You know, that would be a great way to help people, you know, who can't get out of the system, you know, and that's really what needs to happen. You know, there is a system that's this stupid system that's set up that people who are poor, who do get caught on the bottom, have an incentive to stay that way, because if they try to push their way out, they could lose their benefits that are the only thing that's keeping them afloat. So you're at a position where you're trying to do a cost benefit analysis, you know, risk versus benefit analysis when you're somebody who's on welfare, because if you risk trying to come off of welfare, then what? And I remember, because my mom initially was a Reagan Republican who, like, we ended up really poor. She desperately kept trying to get off of welfare because there was such a social stigma in her generation for being on it. And ironically, this is an interesting story I'll tell you guys, because it's also one of the reasons why I can't ever really be anti-Muslim, so to speak, because there are different degrees of people of different religious beliefs. So I was living in the ghetto in Pontiac, and there was a corner store. And I guess this guy got stolen from quite a bit because he always had this nasty look on his face, but he was always polite to us. And I'd go up there, and I had a paper route. I would buy my comic books and, you know, stuff like that. And my mom did a lot of shopping there because we didn't have a car. So she finally got a car, and then she got this job being a secretary somewhere, and it was going to be this great thing for us. It was just going to change everything. She was hoping we could get out of the ghetto, and you know, so she gets this great job and she goes off of welfare because she knows that she's going to make enough money now that she doesn't need it anymore. Well, her new car broke down within 2 weeks and we weren't on welfare anymore. She had $5 in her pocket and was trying to figure out how to fucking feed us. She goes down to the corner store with $5 and she's wandering the aisles trying to figure out how to feed her 3 kids for a month because it takes a while to get back on welfare. And she didn't have a car to get to any of the food banks. So she's literally about to break. And this guy, who used to be like this glowering, just again, he always looked angry. And he comes from behind the counter. He's like, "Ma'am, are you okay?" And she just bursts into tears, right? And she's like, she explains the situation, like, "Oh my God," she's like, I got off of welfare because I got a better job. And I was, and she's like, "And I have no way to feed my family." And so like this man, again, who always had this kind of glowering look on his face, softens. And he says, "You and your children are good customers. Your children never steal from me and they're always respectful. You can feed your family in my store this month within reason." And she was like, "What?" She's like, "He's just take whatever you need, to make dinner, and we'll square it up later, But she got lucky that she encountered somebody like that. In a society that tells you that selfishness is a virtue, these kinds of people are not common. And at the end of it, she tried to pay him back and he refused. He wouldn't take her money. And he was a Muslim man, good guy. But again, so we do need to have welfare reform. We need to have a system that figures out a way to address this issue. But people need to know that the fucking rug's not going to be pulled out from under them if they fail. If they fail to get out. All of the signs are now pointing that we're looking at another horrible recession. These gas prices are supposed to be kicking us right in the fucking face. And if that's the case, we're going to be back where we were during the recession before, if not worse. And I think that those kinds of situations are really what's going to bring you around to the idea that maybe it's not the right or the left. Maybe there's a reasonable combination of both. Because the people who vehemently argue with me and say that Denmark is not a socialist country, but that if we were to do things like welfare, we become a socialist country, it always comes about because people don't realize it can happen to them. It's interesting. Right around before the pandemic started, I found out how many Trump supporters and conservatives were on my Facebook. That's my non-activist one, because of wrestling. Just for whatever reason, the sport of wrestling happens to have a lot of conservatives. And so we brought up the issue of public health care. And holy shit, this woman was just nasty. She was like, "Well, I negotiated a great healthcare plan with my employer, and I don't want Bernie Sanders to take my healthcare program away. And my employer and I, we have a good relationship and everything's going to be fine. And, I like my healthcare plan that I negotiated with my employer." So then when COVID hits, her employer lays her off and she loses her benefits. It's like 3 months after she's bitching me out on my Facebook, right? And then she's quietly asking me how to apply for public assistance. Because it's also a situation where you see like that lady I told you guys about earlier, the one who had the condition that if she eats copper and she doesn't have this drug, she'll die. She wouldn't come on camera for the documentary. Her husband had to give the interview because she knew that if she left her current employer and tried to get hired somewhere else, nobody would hire her because of the insurance costs that come about from having to pay for a drug that costs $100,000 a year. There's no way that insurance company that's stuck in covering her is making any damn money. But in any case, guys, thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you liked listening to my my little stories. Again, it's really important to me that you understand that I answer these kinds of questions. I'm not really into the right versus left argument anymore, because I just want you guys to think. And at the end of the day, you don't have to agree with me about this stuff, but it kind of comes down to this. On the same Facebook page, a lot of my friends tried to argue with each other about whether or not they like Trump or whether or not they like Bernie. And by the time I was done, because I made them be nice to each other, I made them do what we do in our chat here, which is, we're not going to be attacking each other. We're going to have good conversations, and we can disagree with each other and still hold respect for one another. Well, I talked to those guys, and they acknowledged this. A few things. For one thing, they acknowledge that Bernie Sanders, while they did not agree with him, they do believe he genuinely cares. They do not believe that Joe Biden cares. And I don't either. Fuck that guy. Right? So we have an open primary in Michigan. And a bunch of my Republican friends showed me their ballot that after their conversation with me, that they had went ahead and voted for Bernie in our primary. And Bernie won Michigan. You know, I would not have expected, and I didn't expect, that those guys were not going to vote for Trump in the general. But they said if for some reason, you know, if it had to be somebody, they would rather it was Bernie rather than Biden. And that's something I talked to Lynn Wood when I had him on my show. We had a really good conversation about, you know, him being on the right and me being on the left. There should be a give a shit factor. That's what I said. A give a damn factor. So, for example, I don't agree with a lot of the things that Ron Paul believes anymore, but there are things that I do agree with him about. And at the end of the day, I genuinely believe Ron Paul cares. You know, so if I had to choose between Ron Paul and Hillary Clinton, I'm going to fucking vote for Ron Paul every goddamn time. No question. No question. That used to be what most important. Because I believe if Ron Paul saw that his policies were hurting people, he'd try to change them. But I also believe that if Bernie saw that his policies were hurting people, he would try to change them too. A guy like Biden isn't going to do that. A guy like Biden is going to do whatever the corporations want, and the corporations don't give a shit about us. And that is another thing that I think that people are starting to get. That was one of the cores of what I was trying to get here, is that the Republican base needs to fucking recognize that these super wealthy people are not them. They're not on your team. They don't care about you. I did a whole video about that, pointing out that the situation we're in is bipartisan. It was caused by Reaganomics, and it was caused by NAFTA, which is a Clinton thing. And it really wouldn't have mattered who was elected. NAFTA was going to happen because the super wealthy wanted it. And the problem is that demonizing the super wealthy was identified as a communist position. So as a consequence of that, you can't talk to Republicans about it. That's starting to change. They're recognizing that the super, super wealthy, the types like the Elon Musks of the world and the Jeff Bezoses of the world, they're not the capitalist supermen. They're not the group of people that are supposed to be, you know, the group of people that you aspire to be part of. You know, because there's a lie in capitalism and there's a lie in communism. And the lie is that if you just follow the system well enough, you can, you know, there's a utopia at the end of it. And everybody who works hard can be Jeff Bezos. And it's just bullshit. It's just not true. Just like in the Soviet Union, there was a lie being told that eventually everybody can live as well as Joseph Stalin. It was fucking bullshit. Okay. The Politburo and all of their elites. For some reason, these systems always seem to come down to the same thing, which is that at the end of the day, there's this small group of people doing really well and doing the least amount of work. And then there's this enormous group of people doing all of the work. And that happens in communism. It happens in crony capitalism. It happens in all of these systems. That's also why I think people govern themselves a hell of a lot better in small groups. Right. And as Eco Bear points out, super wealthy stay that way by keeping the super poor poor. I 100% agree, and they do that by keeping us divided. They divide us by race, they divide us by gender, they divide us by everything. You know, and like I pointed out in my earlier episodes about Occupy, the woke shit showed up at Occupy and destroyed it. And it suddenly came about, it wasn't the 99% united against the 1%. It was the 13% of the blacks and the 12% of the gays. And you know, we were suddenly all divided up, and then it just totally destroyed it. You know, and so, and as Nuez points out, capitalism in its purest form would be monopolistic as fuck. There's a clip, unfortunately, Joe Rogan clips get nailed, but there's a great clip of Brett Weinstein, who leans to the left, and Jordan Peterson, who leans to the right, and Joe Rogan, who's kind of, I'd say, left center, all coming to an agreement that there needs to be a certain degree of fail-safes. Even Jordan Peterson agrees with this, and he's a conservative. That you need to have some social, safety nets, because capitalism going awry will just leave people fall through the cracks and then they die. But there also needs to be personal liberties. Those things need to exist too. We have to have both. And that's the reason why, I say that at the end of the day, the ultimate system, what I advocate for eventually is a scientific approach to society, a rational, logical, approach to society. But before we get there, we need to have a society that understands that taking care of everybody in it is important, but also protecting the rights of the individual is important. And that can happen. But the way that we're divided, if anybody starts talking about collectively working together to take care of each other, they're labeled a communist. But also, if you talk about a person who says, well, I've done a lot of hard work and I deserve, awards for that, is called a rabid, evil capitalist. And the truth is we need some of both, and the way we're divided, we're told that that's not possible. And I don't agree. I don't agree. If I had my way, well, thanks for the compliment. Jordan Peterson's more like you. Center right. Yeah, I would agree. I definitely don't think he hates communism. Where he and I disagree is that I think he believes that the idea of working together in of itself somehow leads to genocide, and that's not it. That there's a disconnection there. I think that that happens when any small group of people is trying to do better than a much larger group of people. And then again, that happens in communism, it happens in capitalism. Hey, Gary, what's up? Do you have a solution to this division? Yes, I do. It's conversations like this. We need to recognize that we're all one species. We need to recognize that we are one unified species on this earth. And we need to be able to reach out to people across the aisle. And maybe we could just get rid of the fucking aisle, Why don't we stop dividing ourselves in these ways? You could still describe yourself. They could be descriptors. That's why I say left-leaning. But we need to acknowledge that the guy across from us is also a person. He also has struggles, also has, experiences that shape who they are. Okay? That's where we need to be. But that is desperately not what the establishment wants for us right now, man. The establishment right now wants us to dehumanize the other side. And the reason for that, ironically, is something I learned from, of all people, a socialist was warning about this. Maybe I'll play that video for you guys real quick. I have an old video that I think describes this pretty well. Let me go look for it real quick. They're keeping me around longer, but it's fine. But anyway. So this video is kind of old, so the quality's a little blurry. But take a moment and listen to this guy. I think what he says here applies to people this is an important message that both people on the right and the left need to hear.
I want you to imagine a nursery where 20 kids are playing happily. They have the odd spat now and again, but nothing serious. If you've been in kindergartens yourself, you can see how kids operate. They have arguments, they get over it, they work things out, often without any intervention by the supervisor. They're not skilled at diplomacy or people management, they're just doing what comes naturally. Now suppose that the nursery supervisor did a very strange thing and introduced a new kind of game. Except it's not a nice game, it's a rather sick game with sick rules. In this new game, the supervisor gives all the toys to one child. Let's call him Rex. And all the other children have nothing. They can't play with any toy unless they get Rex's permission first. Now, Rex has all the toys, and so Rex has something else too, a new thing that didn't exist before. Rex has got power. If other children want toys to play with, which they will do, being kids, they have to do what Rex says. By his ownership, Rex has power over them. From not being any issue at all, power becomes the central issue, the thing which defines all relationships, the thing that tells the children who they are. This power automatically puts the children in a separate class from Rex. He is the owning or ruling class. They are the dispossessed or toyless class. So, from a peaceful and more or less harmonious kindergarten, we've moved to a mutually hostile and suspicious class society of unequals. Pretty cool game, eh? But there's more. To play this game properly, Rex has to deal with a number of problems. Let's allow him an intelligence slightly in advance of the average 3-year-old. First of all, he has to devise strategies for keeping the other children divided amongst themselves so they won't gang up on him. He won't keep power for long if he doesn't solve this problem first. Right now, the thing to do is to pick out the biggest children and offer them a deal. You protect me against them, and I'll give you some extra rights. It would seem to be in their individual interest to accept this deal. This small band of big kids can be Rex's police force against the toilers. In fact, they can even be his toy soldiers against the world. If any of the toilers get out of line, the toy police can soon give her a black eye and put her in her place. So Rex has invented a coercive hierarchy with himself at the top. So far, so good. But it doesn't take long before Rex finds it rather tedious to have to spend his entire time giving orders and organizing everything. Why not hire some administrators to do it for him? Good idea. Well, now he's just invented a kind of coercive state administration, all to protect his property and his position. But it doesn't end there. He doesn't want pandemonium and endless arguments. He wants a stable working system with himself in charge. What he really needs is legitimacy. He needs to make the children believe that it is entirely natural, right, and proper, that he should have all the toys and they have nothing. If they believe this, they won't see any reason to rebel. Rebelling against Rex would be as ridiculous as rebelling against the sun or the moon or the rain. So how do you make something seem legitimate? Answer: propaganda and persuasion. Rex needs to come up with a lot of propaganda to justify it all, which we can call a set of ideas or an ideology of power. He then teaches this ideology in the kindergarten, in the new school lessons he has devised. We don't need to know what this ideology is. It doesn't matter how he justifies himself, as long as he does. He can say anything he likes, as long as it works. He can do other things too, like dress up in fancy clothes, maybe wear a wig when he's judging wrongdoers, sit on a tall chair so that he looks down on everyone, speak in a funny voice, use long or foreign words that he knows they won't understand. There are all sorts of things he can do to sound important, big and clever. Eventually, if he does it right, they'll believe he is more important, big and clever than they are. And they'll believe in the natural order of things. He will be the natural order of things to them. They will never rebel. Or maybe they will. What could he do to make doubly sure? In the long run, the best trick is if he can teach them to hate each other. Whites and blacks, boys and girls, Jews and Gentiles, big ears and little ears. Again, whatever works. If they can never trust each other, they can never be too strong for him. So he starts to give treats to the white kids. but extra punishments to the black kids, saying that blacks don't really deserve any better. And he encourages the whites to bully the blacks. Ideology. Divide one way. Clever, hey. But not only that, he tells every boy to take a girl as his personal property. And if she doesn't like it, give her a black eye. He encourages boys to bully girls. Divide 2 ways. Then he can start on religion 3 ways, 4 ways, 5 ways. There are any number of possibilities because children are all different and you can exploit those differences. And when they're all fighting each other and he's got them running scared, he can tell them they're all basically criminals who need to be kept in control by his police. He can tell them that they need even more police, more criminal laws, more sin bins, more surveillance. If he's good at it, he can get the children themselves actually demanding more police, more laws, more sin bins, more surveillance. This might all sound very clever, but this is only the sort of thing Machiavelli used to make a living advising Italian princes about. As for the toyless children, it's no use having them just sitting there doing nothing. They should be doing something useful. Otherwise, they'll be causing trouble. They need to be put to work. Well, the kindergarten should have new toys, shouldn't it? That's what it's there for. Well, that's what the toyless can do. They can make new toys for Rex. And in return, Rex might pay them with a little bit of temporary playtime. Call it holiday or weekend or leisure. Instead of toyless, they can be toilers. The dispossessed class can become a working class. They're kept too busy to think straight, and Rex gets more and more toys. Great. But there's more. Rex has got ambitions for expansion. And he's got his eye on a kindergarten over the road and all the lovely toys in there. Not only that, but he's worried. His opposite number over there might be thinking about expansion too, into Rex's territory. What Rex needs to do is act first. Get across that main road with a big toy army. And don't forget, he can explain to all the children that it's all a question of defense. Ideology. Well, we've come a long way in a short time. How different it all was a moment ago. Remember the original kindergarten? The kids were all equals. They shared the toys. It was pretty much peace and harmony most of the time. If any kids whisper about those days now, Rex will have them beaten up or put in the corner or the sin bin, or just laughed at. Equality, peace, harmony, sharing. That's just a utopia, an idle dream, a kid's fantasy, says Rex. It never happened. It never existed. It never could happen, says Rex. Just look in the history books I've had printed especially for you. And anyway, says Rex, look at yourselves. You hate each other. You are evil. You beat each other up. You're nothing better than wild animals. You need a strong leader like me to keep you in line. If you were set loose and free to have all the toys, what would you do? You'd kill each other and burn the kindergarten down. I'm going to make you all read Lord of the Flies just to prove it. You're bad. That's why I'm in charge, says Rex. And you know what? The children agree with him. We're bad, they say. We can't trust each other. We have criminal natures. We need to be ruled. They believe every word of this because by now they're not children anymore. They've grown up and become what Rex wanted them to become. And they've forgotten their childhood dreams. They are adults. And they accept the world the way it is, the way it has to be. Utopias are fairy tales, children's stories.
So that was from Capitalism and Other Kid Stuff, and that guy's actually a socialist, ironically. But one of the some of the things that he points out, though, are legit, and this is one of the things I was getting at earlier, is that unfortunately, both the communists who at least care about people, socialists, and the capitalists see some of the correct, basically make correct observations about what's wrong. The issue is that then they start to fight about what the best solution is. And I think that, for one thing, one of the things that's in one of the memes in my meme intro is that people blame the government and not the super wealthy. Like, that was actually something that came up and I accidentally didn't realize it was Skillet who said it. But the problem is that the super wealthy own the government. So then your solution is what? Well, then we don't have a government. Okay, well, then the super wealthy can just run everything. This is the argument that I usually have with anarcho-capitalists when I had a lot of debates with prominent anarcho-capitalists, Stefan Molyneux, Michael Shanklin, etc. And they have these ideas. Well, then everybody could just have their own private security and their own private armies, and everything will be fine because we'll have this central idea called the non-aggression principle. The problem is that throughout history, anytime super wealthy people have been allowed to build their own private armies, it has not gone well for people who did not have as big armies as them. So that's why I said when it comes to like post-apocalyptic societies or whatever, I was also talking about that. Something that I'm part of is a group of people. Storm Clouds Gathering is another YouTube creator, used to be really big. I'm good friends with him. But we believe that if there is a societal collapse, that society should devolve into what I would call, it's called a federation. And that is that smaller member states within the federation, which is honestly kind of what the founding fathers really had in mind with states' rights, can decide to kind of govern themselves any way they want. If they want to have a socialist commune where everybody works together and takes care of each other, as long as they're not hurting anyone else, fine. And then they can open trade. And maybe then there's another member of that federation that is a capitalist part, where everybody's trading and, developing or whatever. And, but they could peacefully coexist and have a federation with each other. And in that federation, there would be not only a non-aggression principle between them, not a non-aggression pact, but also a mutual defense pact. One of the major reasons why governments exist is that larger entities can show up and try to conquer you. And a federation could be much more loosely governed than what you see right now in our country. It could be it could just be kind of an understanding of principles. Okay, so if you want to be part of our federation, you guys can have your own ideas about religion and you can have your own ideas about economics, but certain things we'd prefer, if you're going to be in our federation, you can't do. So we could say no child sex slavery or whatever, but we're not going to get in your face about your thoughts about, whether or not you're communist or capitalist or, whether or not you're Christian or not Christian, and I think that people govern themselves a hell of a lot better in smaller groups. And this was the point that I was trying to get at before, guys, is that both capitalism and communism just allowed to run awry. And this is what Jordan Peterson and Brett Weinstein and Joe Rogan say in this clip that I wish I could play. that both of those systems getting out of control still lead to the same thing, which is a small group of people somehow doing the least amount of work and living the highest quality lifestyle, and then everybody else busting their ass. Both of those systems lead in that direction. And you could say, well, the government is the problem, but you can't talk about the government being the problem when you're also and then therefore say that somehow these people with inordinately ridiculous amounts of money would not be able to do these things if there was no government. Without the government, then there's no filter whatsoever to stop them from just outright running everything. So that's why there's no perfect system, because human beings are not perfect people. So Skillet Pan says, if people want evidence of the rich and powerful people controlling things like the government, then look no further than the HDD issues the last few years and that guy who didn't kill himself. Epstein didn't kill himself. Exactly. And as you said, they do have their own private armies. They have ours. I don't disagree that that goes on by any means, but getting rid of government alone doesn't make that go away. It says, that is what is supposed to be set up in the U.S. Constitution. The federal government has grown to overpower the states. The states are sovereign for the federal government, or are supposed to be. Right. That is. And they modeled that from the, what was it? The Iroquois nation. When you're told in school that the founding fathers met with Native Americans, the Iroquois were a federation, a loosely, unified group of individual tribes that still governed themselves their own way, but had an agreement that they were going to stop any larger force. Somebody brought up the postmen earlier, and that's a perfect example of a group of people who seriously needed to form a federation, because there were all these little individual communities that governed themselves, but then there was one large group. Well, it wasn't even necessarily that the group was large, is that they had the largest army. That was the Nathan Hode guy or whatever, the main villain of the postmen. That's a real thing. So we can't just all have our own little communities and then just somehow believe that this thing called the non-aggression principle is going to save us, because without some kind of hard agreement between people, as you say, the army of 8, right? That's an example of what happens, is that, somebody's going to get through their head that, well, if I form a bigger army than everyone else, then I'm in charge. So you have to be able to protect yourself from that. And that's where a federation comes in. So what needs to happen, though, is so for example, we talk about successful communes like Twin Oaks, although unfortunately now they're getting woke. If you have a commune, a small commune is really just a family farm. One of the greatest American institutions is the family farm. Mom and dad get together, have 12 children, and then they take care of a piece of land together. They cultivate it. They take care of each other. That's what a small commune is, right? There's nothing wrong with that. If a group of people who are not related to each other voluntarily get together and agree to take care of each other, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Just like there isn't, if a village gets together and they want to have an independent blacksmith and an independent, just barber, whatever, there's nothing wrong with that either. We need to recognize that there's one major problem that I've noticed. This is one of my big disagreements with Jordan Peterson, is that he believes that communism and authoritarianism can't be divorced from one another. And the left, the really ridiculous left that believes that censorship is good because they've been told, this is the other thing, they've been told that authoritarianism only comes from the right. Those are the misconceptions. We believe, okay, so libertarian versus authoritarian has nothing to do necessarily with the economic system in question. So you can have a libertarian socialist commune. That's totally possible. And you can have a libertarian capitalist community. Those things can both exist. But if you were to listen to the bullshit of the right and the left, they both pointed fingers at each other. Here's another funny little thing I'll bring up when we're talking about the socialists that aren't idiots. George Orwell, frequently quoted by conservatives in 1984, in Animal Farm, and the many books that he wrote. Well, George Orwell was a socialist, guys, and he was trying to warn other socialists, hey guys, if you're not careful, this is the shit that can happen. This is how authoritarianism takes control. George Orwell was a socialist who wrote those books to warn socialists about the pitfalls of the things that can happen if you're not vigilant. He wasn't condemning all socialism altogether. So I want to be clear about this. I am anti-authoritarian. I do believe we need to have law and order. But if for some reason some kind of authoritarian communist government tried to take over this country, I'd be out there with my gun, with my 100-round drum, sitting right next to you saying the fuck you will. Okay? And there are other people who lean left who feel that way. You know, but we're being divided because I think that it's really important to the super duper wealthy that we never ever figure out that we could just work together and take care of each other and peacefully coexist. It's important to them that we never come to that conclusion, because if we did, then we would also be looking up to the top of the pyramid going, why the fuck are we letting these people have this much money? Looking at the chat. What do you mean somehow? I don't know what you're specifically referring to about what I just said. I'm sorry. If you could be more specific, I'll try to answer you. So thanks again for listening, guys. And remember that my objective is that we need to be able to have these peaceful conversations. We need to be able to disagree with each other so that we can break these concepts down and try to find the best solution. Oh, the government being taken over by the commies. Well, yeah, that would be bad. But also what is bad is when the government is taken over by the super mega capitalists. One of the things I would say, you know, there are documentaries that you can watch about this, but there are psychologists who have come forward to point out that frequently when their clients are the super wealthy CEOs, that frequently the kind of people who make that kind of money are psychopaths, and that you need to be a psychopath to be good at capitalism, meaning to the point where you get so out of control that you have so much more money. This is the part that I think people need to recognize. The super wealthy are in a class unto themselves. They've conned people into believing that if you work hard enough, you can be them. But the truth is they write the rules and they make sure that that isn't true. They like being where they're at. One of the documentaries I watched, like, just followed the life of this guy who was like a billionaire, and he literally felt like a drug addict, and he got rid of a lot of his money because he felt like I was never satisfied. I just couldn't acquire enough. I was constantly chasing the dragon, just like a heroin addict would say, you know, to find the ultimate acquisition. And you get to the end of that and you realize, after you've destroyed a bunch of lives and, you know, destroyed your family life, that just like heroin, the dragon is a lie. You're never going to see it again. No, and it's never enough. You also got to consider for a moment, like, what monarchy did to the minds of the people who had that much individual power. That power still exists to the super, super wealthy. And again, I'm not talking about mom and pop, middle class, owns their own business, does pretty well for themselves. Those are not the people I'm talking about. I'm talking about the people that destroyed the mom and pop middle class businesses, not because they cared about the poor. They destroyed the middle class because they don't want there to be a middle class. They want Walmart and Amazon to be the only way that you do business. So be aware of that. Thanks again for tuning in today, guys. You have been listening to V Radio. If you like this, please like, subscribe, ring the bell, share, etc. If you haven't already smashed the like button, please do. Needs to go on Timcast IRL. I would love to go on Timcast. I'd love to go on some of these bigger channels. YouTube definitely does not want somebody talking like me getting a whole lot of attention, though. And it's because of the fact that I'm a peacemaker. I want to see these sides work together to overthrow the real threat. And the real threat is not left or right. It's up. Look up. Who is the one controlling all of this? Every war that has happened generally happens because somebody's making inordinate amounts of money about it. I don't have the clip handy, but I was on a conservative radio show once, and it was called Steel on Steel. It was a very good conversation. You guys can find that on my channel too. And I pointed out this clip from George Carlin, where he's basically saying, how we make fun of people who discuss conspiracy theories, that it's just preposterous that a group of extremely wealthy people might get together and have a plan. You're a kook, you're a conspiracy buff if you talk about that. And people joke now about how Alex Jones looks right about a lot of things. I actually think Alex Jones's job is to be as crazy as possible while telling kernels of the truth, so that anybody who actually stumbles on the truth looks crazy for even entertaining the notion. That's what I think the truth about Alex Jones is. I think in some way he's an agent of his own, whether his own making or not. But the Bilderberg Group is real. They don't even hide it. Super wealthy people all over the country get together in these meetings, and they decide who presidents are going to be. They decide how wars are going to happen. And if you talk about that, you're told that you're fucking crazy. So what are all those wealthy people getting together for? Nobody argue. Nobody argues about that they're there, because it's public knowledge that they're there. Even violating, laws, like senators show up at these things. They're not even supposed to do that, right? So think to yourself this: whether you're a socialist or a capitalist, neither of those systems can function the way that they are intended if there's this small minority who is living, doing the least amount of work, and living the highest lifestyle. And both capitalism and socialism can fall into that crack and end up in that situation. And both capitalism and socialism claim that only the other side does that. That's just bullshit. Take care, everybody. Go to v-radio, v-radio.us. Join me on my social media. You can have conversations like this with me just about any time. And you're damn right I'm pretty based. Based up in this shit, motherfucker. Not only am I based, I'm trebled. Yep, that's a dad joke with music. Bass and treble. People tend to forget there is such a thing as treble now that we don't have a treble knob on our stereos. Man, that's showing my age, isn't it? It's a big club, and you ain't in it. You and I are not in the big club. Take care, guys.